Good evening, everybody. I'd like to ask everybody to please take a seat. And I'd also like to go ahead and call the meeting of the Placerville City Council for July 9th to order. And I'd like to ask everyone to please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all very much. And again, good evening to everybody in the audience and to our distinguished staff members who are present here this evening. I'd like to go ahead and ask the clerk to call the roll.
Mayor Acuna?
Here.
Councilmember Borelli will be noted as absent. Vice Mayor Zaragoza?
Here.
Councilmember Taylor?
Here.
Councilmember Thomas?
Here.
Thank you very much. We'll hope that Councilmember Borelli is feeling better soon and certainly joins us. Announcements and presentations to the public. Item 3.1, brief comments by the City Council. Are there any comments or reports that the council members would like to share this evening? Vice Mayor Zaragoza?
Just that some entertaining stuff going on at the Capitol this week. This is the last week of session before they go on summer recess. One of the big bills that is still looming out there is what ultimately the fire bill will look like in terms of mitigations and dollars that are out there. So that's still hanging out. Housing bill will probably come back after the recess. And then, of course, there's still the $1 billion that was included in the budget for homeless. And so that will eventually matriculate down through the counties. And so we will be able to have that conversation with the county once they have their allocation done. And there's a formulaic to it, but there'll be some competitive funds out there as well. And that's really it on my end right now. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. Councilmember Thomas?
I have nothing today.
Well, welcome back. We missed you at our last meeting. Councilmember Taylor, did you have any comments or anything to report to the community this evening?
Sure. I was really happy to hear about the City of Placerville receiving the City of the Month Award from the California State Library for our work in historic preservation. And we are working on reviewing cannabis applications, so the cannabis meeting will be happening tomorrow for the committee. So that's moving forward. And I was really saddened to hear about the loss of firefighter Brandon Hoostry. It's such a horrible loss for the community and for his family. So my heart goes out to his wife and child. And his service will be this weekend on Saturday at the District Church in El Dorado Hills. So that's all my comments.
Thank you very much. If I could get a clarification on the cannabis meeting that's going to be taking place.
The committee will be reviewing the scores from HDL, our consultant, for the 14 applications.
The 14 applications. Cleve, did you have anything to add to that? Because there is some growing interest to that process.
Right. Yeah, just that we are working through the process. We received the scoring from HDL, and our committee that's made up of Councilmember Taylor, former Councilmember John Carici, our police department, and then Pierre Rivas will be the committee that will review those, basically reviewing the scores that HDL has done and confirming those numbers. And then the next process is that the committee will interview all of the applicants that pass that stage. So that will be happening over the next about month or month and a half. So
thank you, Cleve. So it's a slow process, lots of interest, moving through the steps as we anticipated. So thanks for the interest in the report on that. Thank you for reminding me about being selected by the California State Library as historic city the city of the month, and thanked for our work that we do in historic preservation here. I think I got to enjoy that for about 2 hours, and then had another issue come up, and I completely forgot about it until you just mentioned it. So I have to go back and click on my own email to go see the nice things that the state said about us. So we are the featured city of the month. So thanks to the California State Library. They are a tremendous asset of all things California. I would like to also just comment on, there was a lot of concern over the Vice Mayor mentioning the various challenges with the state budget. One of the more interesting things that occurred was when the governor redlined the approximate $2 million for the courthouse process. And as a community, that is a process that desperately needs to take place. This county needs a new, safe courthouse. There's a tremendous amount of anarchy, if you will, going on behind the scenes as different forces try and pull one way or another. And maybe as this is being reset, the community can also think about perhaps realistically reusing the courthouse and maybe using it for non-criminal purposes, keeping it a courthouse. I think it's very grand to think that we could fill that building as a museum, but I don't know where those volunteers or where those dollars would come from. And so maybe there is another blessing in what the governor has done and sending that back through the judicial review. And again, I would encourage the community to think about retaining it as a courthouse. Seems like a simple thing to do and create a safe, modern criminal courthouse, not only for the public, but for all the judges and all the people that work in those facilities. Right now, our current courthouse just does not cut it. So thank you for your update on the budget, for reminding me of.
Absolutely. And I'll just add one thing on that, and that is, just for the record, neither the county nor the city had asked for those funds in the way that they ultimately came down through Senator Nielsen's office, who's the vice chair of the Budget Committee. For however, former Senator Briggs was able to persuade him to do that. But just for all the conspiracy theories out there, that money was never asked for by either the city or the county in that form, which is why everybody was surprised when it came out and why it was only one of 3 items that was ultimately redlined or blue penciled out of the state budget. And so just wanted to put that out there as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate
Can
it.
I add to that, since you're on that
can.
topic, just quickly? As you recall, when that funding was frozen, the new analysis was asked to be done of that courthouse, those projects, all the courthouse projects. That analysis is proposed to be completed, as required to be completed by the end of December of this year. And at that time, all of that will come back up and propose funding for different courthouses. When we were in the queue before, we scored very highly in terms of the need. And so we assume, in talking to the county, I was talking to Don Ashton about this, that we will probably be towards the top of the list again in terms of need for a courthouse. So, but the process is to wait until the end of December when they finish the report, and then we'll see where we're at. So.
Thank you, Cleve. And as we, you mean just us as interested bystanders, because we have absolutely nothing to do with the process other than being the city that happens to be the residency of the current and proposed courthouses. So thank you on that. With that, we'll go ahead and move on to, well, first of all, I'd like to recognize Commander Joe Wren, who is here this evening, seated next to our Finance Director, Mr. Warren. Joe is filling in for our Police Chief, who is, we're allowing him to take a little bit of a vacation, but not too much. So we appreciate his time here this evening in the Chief's place. So that'll bring us on to item 3.2, the El Dorado County Fire Protection District Tax Presentation. And I would welcome any member of the Fire District. Good evening, Chief. Nice to see you. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself for our audience.
Well, thank you, Mayor and City Council. Mr. Manager, thank you. My name is Lloyd Ogan. I'm the Fire Chief for El Dorado County Fire Protection District, and we appreciate the opportunity to come and talk a little bit about our tax measure. As you guys know, El Dorado County Fire Protection District has valued greatly our relationship with the city and the opportunity to partner in fire protection with the city of Placerville. We've been providing that service now for 28 years, and that hasn't always come without challenges, but we've done the best we can with the resources that we have. Tonight we want to talk a little bit about the history of our organization, a little bit about our profile, and some of the challenges we currently face, and one of the tools that we're using to try to address that. So our district was formed in 1991. It's a consolidation of 6 districts today that provide service all over El Dorado County. Today we are staffed with 6 fire stations across our district. 4 of those fire stations are staffed with 2 firefighters every day, and 2 of them are staffed with 3 firefighters. One of those happens to be here in the city of Placerville, which we just accomplished in March, and that has been a struggle. It's been one of our challenges, as that staffing has gone up and down over the years. We also staff those 6 stations with 4 ambulances too, so 4 of those stations have an ambulance with 2 personnel on them as well. Our district proper covers almost 300 square miles of El Dorado County, mostly on the eastern end. And so the boundaries of our district just roughly go from roughly the boundary of Shingle Springs and Cameron Park to Camp Sacramento, and from Somerset to Cool on the north. However, it doesn't give the whole picture of what our agency is responsible for from the standpoint of response. So we also border a large front of El Dorado National Forest. And because of that, we have first response criteria for primarily rescue and EMS year-round, and we provide a force multiplier for fires to El Dorado National Forest. If you add that response criteria, we have a total of 600 square miles that our district is responsible for, and we cover that with 6 engines every day and 4 ambulances. So you see us moving around this county a lot just to try to stay in position. The good news is we don't cover that by ourselves. We have a really robust automatic aid agreement in this county, and we send the closest unit to the incident regardless of what the decal says on the door. So that's some good news, and it works pretty well, and it works good 85% of the time. When we have those big sentinel incidents, that's when we really begin to see the challenges. Our total staffing in our district's about 74 personnel total, and another piece of good news is we just are in the process of bringing 5 new firefighters on, and for the first time in several years, our district will be 100% staffed, which will help us a lot from the standpoint of mitigating some other costs that are related to staff openings. Tonight, before I get into the tax measure, though, I want to tell you a little bit about a fiscal story. So when I came here in January, I asked for the budgets for the last 7 years, and I laid those budgets on my desk, and I took a piece of paper, and I started in 2011-12 fiscal year, and I began to write a fiscal story about what the condition of the agency was from a fiscal standpoint. And the district has actually a pretty compelling story to tell. In 2011-12 fiscal year, as a result of the downturn, the fiscal downturn, and as the result of some internal issues within the organization, they found themselves in a $1.4 to $1.6 million deficit with very little reserves to address those issues. And talking to the county auditor, what they told me was that this agency was at the brink of municipal bankruptcy if they didn't do something. And a lot of things were looked at by both the board and the administration at the time, and working with the firefighters labor unit, they began to dig into the problem. All 3 groups. They discovered what those issues were and began to build a plan to work on it, because the reality was all the cooperative agreements that they had worked on were not going to be an option. And so they had to fix the problem themselves or not exist as a fire department. So the employees and the board of directors, they identified the issues, they implemented a recovery plan, and that recovery plan was what every citizen, I think, would want any good governance to do. And that the first thing they did was they looked at their employee costs, so they contained their pension cost, they contained their health care cost, they contained their retiree health care cost, and they took salary adjustments. And if you take all of that and put it all together, depending on what classification you look at, they took about an 18 to 22% total benefits and wages cut in order to immediately begin to address their needs. Once they had done all that, the last thing they had left to do was to look at the services that we provide and try to bring those down into alignment with a balanced budget. And so as a result of that, they ended up closing 1 fire engine completely for a while, which is up in Camino. They lost a flex time medic, which was Medic 26. They closed their apprentice program, which was apprentice firefighters that was providing some peak staffing in some places. They eliminated 2 assistant chief positions, 1 battalion chief position, 2 captain positions that were administrative, and 2 support personnel. and brought their administration down to really a skeleton administration. They did all that without asking for any new taxes. They did all that without asking for additional funding from the county, and they did all that without doing a federal SAFER grant, which would have caused some additional fiscal impacts, because there is a matching component to that, and those grants end, and then you have to pick up those costs. So they did all of that without any external assistance. And the good news is they got their budget balanced, and for the past 7 years, their budget has been balanced, and we've been in the black, and slowly growing our reserves. However, the ability to replace those lost resources wasn't there. So today, a little bit of good news is we've had a little bit of recovery. So one of those chiefs has been recovered. One administrative captain for our fire prevention has been recovered. And as of 7 days ago, the engine was recovered. So engine 21 up in Camino has gone back to full service engine and is fully staffed now again with 2 firefighters in engine 21. So as we did our assessment, we looked at what are the critical needs of the organization. And if we look at the organization, the most critical need the organization has today is staffing. And if we look at the organization today, we are severely understaffed from the standpoint of firefighter safety and really safety of the public. So the national standard is an NFPA standard 1710 that recommends ideal staffing at 4 personnel, minimum staffing at 3. We're staffed, as I told you earlier, we're staffed at 2 on 4 of our engines. And we have got to fix that problem, because our firefighters today, as they try to address the 2 in, 2 out laws, which means if 2 firefighters are inside, we have to have 2 firefighters outside, we almost can't do that in many places in our organization, including here in Placerville, because we've got to wait for that backup engine to arrive. So from the standpoint of firefighter safety, we have got to address that issue and get our staffing up to at least the minimum standard of 3 personnel. One of our other critical needs is retention. Because of the 18 to 22% reduction, we have lost a tremendous amount of our tenured employees who have gone to other agencies that could provide, at the time, a more stable working environment for a little bit better pay. And so today, about 70% of our workforce has less than 5 years on the job. And because we're hiring so fast, that number is not going to change for a little bit. So we need to figure out a way to in a very controlled way, to begin to address that retention issue. The other need we have is infrastructure. So some of our stations are in pretty good shape. We have 1 new station, but we have several stations, and the Placerville station, Station 25, is probably our number 1 need, and we need to have them replaced. So we need to build a capital improvement strategy, and without additional resources, we don't have a tool to do that. So today, 3 of our stations need remodels, significant remodels, and 1 needs to be replaced. So what's Measure B going to do for us? As we looked at what we needed to do, we didn't look at what we would like to get, we looked at what we needed to do. And in order to get to where we needed, we hired a consultant, and we came up with a model of the dollar amount that we would need per parcel to get to the place where we could address those 4 critical areas. So Measure B, what it's going to do is it's going to provide staffing for all 6 of our engines across the board, so we meet the NFPA minimum standard. It's going to begin to provide some opportunity for us to address those infrastructure needs and build some capital improvement strategies for our department. It'll give us the opportunity to be able to, on a really measured level, to control or to begin to address our retention strategy for our organization going forward. The benefits to Placerville in particular. So, by getting up to the minimum required staffing of 3 personnel, what Measure B will allow us to do is to increase the overall effectiveness of our entire district by 33%. However, that doesn't really tell the whole story. So I'll just use an incident here in Placerville to describe how this will work, because what we will see most of the time is probably at least a 50% increase in our effectiveness. So in Placerville today, we have a 3-person engine company that responds, but that is our busiest engine company, and when we have to back up engine 25, we back it up with a 2-person engine. And so if we have this time of year, we have a wildland fire in our district, and we have a small wildland fire that's, say, working up a slope behind a house here. As our engine arrives with 2 people on it, the captain gets off, grabs a line, and takes that line on one flank of the fire. That means the other flank of the fire is going unchecked because the other person is putting the rig and pump, getting a water supply. Nobody's attacking that flank of the fire. If we can add the 3rd person across the board on our engines, that means every engine that comes to the city of Placerville has the ability for the captain to attack one flank of the fire and the firefighter to attack the other flank simultaneously, and giving us the opportunity to wrap that fire quickly and mitigate it before it becomes a large incident or a larger incident. So that's a simple explanation of what the benefits of 3-person staffing does for us, and it allows us to do that on an everyday basis in Placerville. One of the other ways to look at it is right here on the main street. We've always said, all of us for years, that this is our target hazard. We've got to keep Placerville from burning down another time in the history of its history. And so we're always thinking about what's the response force we need to bring here. Because we can increase our staffing to 3-person staffing, what it does for us is, if you think about the number of bodies, El Dorado County Fire can now bring an equivalent of 2 more engines of people to the city of Placerville when we have that fire on Main Street. That's huge for us. We don't need necessarily more rigs, we need people. That's what we need on the scene. It gives us the ability to bring our ladder truck on an initial alarm instead of having to wait and have somebody else go and pick it up. It gives us the ability to bring water tenders in on initial alarm instead of having to special call and wait for somebody else to bring it. So our ability to increase our effectiveness is going to go up exponentially as we add that 3rd person on all the rest of our equipment. The other thing it does for us from a fire prevention standpoint is it increases our effectiveness when we're doing defensible space inspections. So today, if we go into a neighborhood, we stop our rig in a neighborhood, and our 2 guys get out and walk the neighborhood. We bring down engine 21 a lot of times for the upper end of Placerville to help out engine 25. Today, those 2 guys can do, I'll just use a number, they can do, say, 2 inspections an hour. If we put that 3rd person on, we can do 3 inspections an hour, and you can see how we get, over a week's period, we get quite a bit more inspections done on the fire prevention side using our engine companies. So we see a lot of benefits to our organization as a whole. When we look at Placerville, we see the opportunity to provide a lot higher level of service to the city of Placerville, which is where one of our primary target hazards from a standpoint of density is in our entire district. And so to us, Measure B is a huge advantage for us on the urban side of our protection. So just to sum it up a little bit, what we believe this is going to do for us, and it's the reason we chose the number we did, because it doesn't put us in a place where we need to continually keep coming back. We're employing other measures too to increase our base staffing, so it's not just Measure B, but this measure will help us provide a level of sustainability that's not just for tomorrow, but it provides a level of sustainability for us that reaches out into the future quite a few years. It also provides some safeguards for us to enhance our initial attack on all fire incidents and not just fire incidents, but all incidents. So what I should say is, because we're an all-risk organization and we don't just fight fires, we respond to medical aids, we respond to rescues. That third person is going to provide a lot more capability. And I'll give you an instance on EMS calls. Today, if we go on a cardiac arrest, which is our highest level of, probably our highest level of resource needs, when we respond on a cardiac arrest with a 2-person engine company today, we always start a second engine company because we don't have enough personnel on scene with an ambulance and an engine to run a cardiac arrest. It takes a minimum of 5 people to run a full code, and if we're responding with 4, we've got to start another engine. By putting 3 people on our engines, we're at least arriving on the scene with the ability to do all the critical functions instantly when we arrive on scene with that medic unit. So as we look down the road, we believe we will begin to see a relatively significant reduction in our property loss numbers as we upstaff the organization, and we believe we'll begin to see an increase in our life-saving capability, especially on the cardiac and stroke and maybe some of those critical trauma pieces. So I know I went through it really quick, but that's just a summary of what we believe that Measure B is going to provide for our organization. We know that there's a history here, and we tried to be respectful of that. We know that in the past that the city had run a proposition, and we didn't want to compete with that, and so we chose this opportunity when we're not competing with anybody else's measure, and trying to dilute that. So we're trying to be respectful of that also, and that's partly part of the timing that we're doing. So with that, I'd be willing to answer any questions that you have about that.
Well, thank you very much, Chief. We appreciate you coming here this evening. And it should be noted that you are not asking for the city to take a position on this. This is strictly an informational presentation that will be available not only this evening, but also as rebroadcast and on YouTube, to perhaps answer any questions that people may have on what your efforts and what your goals are. Are there any specific questions for the Chief from council members on what's been presented?
I've got a question.
Karen, go ahead, please.
Thank you for your presentation.
Absolutely.
We really appreciate everything that you guys do. Just a quick question, what is the number?
So the number is $96 per parcel,
Okay.
and that's district-wide.
Okay, thank you.
Chief, I know you, thank you again for the presentation. I know you mentioned that there's safeguards built in terms of funding into the future. So is it CPI'd? Is that how that works, or?
So as the, yes, exactly. As the tax measure goes, or as the tax rolls go up, so does the measure,
base
yep.
cost.
The base goes up, yep.
Got it. Thank you.
There's certain areas within the district that already have assessments. Will this be on top of those assessments?
Yes,
Okay.
yep.
And is it time to make comments? I'm gonna, just for reference, I have spent I started with the district in 2011, right when that what we call fiscal emergency occurred. And I was on the board of directors, and I'll have to tell you that the firefighters at that time took the brunt of it. We were, the salaries were approaching 90% of the budget, which was completely out of line with what needed to happen for a good, sound budget in the fire district. And it was due entirely to the reduction of property taxes and the loss of property tax revenue to the fire district. The firefighters, like the chief said, really were the heroes when it comes to balancing that budget. They not only did we lose significant staffing at the main office, but the firefighters took an amazing amount of pressure off of the budget, and they did that and participated in a very meaningful way. I have a lot of respect for what the firefighters did and how they allowed the fire district to stay whole. Had they not done that at that time, there would have been a whole new story that they were telling back in 2012 because we were running out of money. We were out of money. When I came on, we had a budget that was 1.5 million in the hole, and the only way to balance that was to have some retirements and do some major cuts. And they did it, and they stepped up and they did it, and they knew what they needed to do, and it happened. Fast forward to today, there's a reason why you have such a low number when it comes to your average tenured employee. And I have to tell you, that's a challenge, not having that brain trust within the department. And I think that this is a very appropriate, from my perspective, being involved with this for the last 7 years, this is a very appropriate thing to do, to raise this additional funds for the fire district. 2 years ago, when the city went for Measure L to acquire our road tax, I was involved in the conversations where, the city said we really need this road tax, and the fire department said, and I was on the board at the time, and we made a conscious decision not to compete with that road tax because it was important for the city. And so, and we figured if we both went for it, we would both lose. And so the city did say at that time, because I was on the board at that time and not on the city at that time, they did say that they would support the fire department when it came back around to them. And the fire department was supportive. They went out and walked the streets for us, and they helped move the needle for the city in terms of getting that passed. And I know that they just did it. And I think that it's important for the city to recognize the efforts that the fire department put in to help get our Measure L passed, which was $2 million a year for us, and that was huge. And so going forward, I think the city owes a little bit back to the fire department, and not just because they owe it to them, but because it's the right thing to do. We need this fire department to be healthy, to service our community, and I think this is a very appropriate way to do it. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Chief, thank you again for your presentation this evening and for your dedication to our community, filling in while the district finds a permanent chief. Somebody with your experience is exactly what we need. So we appreciate you stepping up to that role. Something that's kind of unique is the city is not impacted by the CAL FIRE fees, which has been so controversial. Was it a tax? Was it a fee? That whole story. This would be something that would be the first time the citizens would be asked to contribute a special $96 parcel fee. Chief, when is the election scheduled?
So it's a mail-in election, and the mailings happen on July 27th. They get mailed out, and there's a 30-day return on them. So August 27th, I believe, is the last day that they can be mailed back in.
So July 27th to August
27th.
Mm-hmm. Mail-in only, so the people should be watching for that then.
Yep.
All right.
And Chief, is that a simple majority or a
No.
supermajority vote?
It's a two-thirds
Two-thirds.
majority. Yep.
So it is
Yeah.
right. I would just comment that I was here during that transition period through the Great Recession that Dave Warren still fears on many occasions, and saw the serious impacts that all of the city services and the community services took. And I can remember there were definitely huge impacts. There was a time when the department didn't actually have the fire marshal position filled. It was a fire inspector kind of. I mean, I know that was something that you were able to restore as a department just probably about a year ago.
Correct.
And not having those kinds of services available today, and the expectations of other agencies, including the insurance industry, and wanting to know, well, what's your fire rating, and what is that department staffed with, and what is their, who is their fire marshal, and what kind of an inspection program are they running, is huge. And there is the big issue of being able to even maintain an insurance rating in the state of California right now. I know my insurance has gone up over $1,000, and I find myself thanking that I got insurance. That's really sad. But these are the kind of things that we as a community, we as a state have to face. So, I would wish you well in your endeavor, and we do appreciate the services that you've been able to restore. We do recognize that Station 25 is, excuse me, very busy, and sometimes with the old hands, it was very desirable to have all those runs. So hopefully these young guys like that action as well. But I can truly appreciate the need to have the initial response, have the aggressive attack at the beginning of the incident, not 2 days later.
Yep.
It needs to happen in the first few minutes, not even the first 10 minutes. So I wish you well in your endeavor.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions to the city manager or council members? I think we've got it. Thank you. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you.
And hopefully we will successfully begin the process of adopting our fire safe ordinance in a few minutes. All right.
Mr. Mayor? Sorry, over here.
Oh,
I
hello
believe
there.
we do have a member of the public who would like to comment on the presentation, if that's all right.
Pardon me?
We have a member of the public who would like to make a comment on the presentation.
City
if that's
attorney,
okay.
I don't want to get into, if I let one person speak, I really need to let the whole room speak.
Yeah, it's an agenda item, so I think they have the right to comment on it.
All righty, very good. Is there a member of the public that would like to address the council on this item, the fire district's presentation on their ballot measure? Good evening. If you could state your name for the record, please.
Good evening, Mayor. My name's Mike Campbell. I'm an engineer paramedic with El Dorado County Fire, and I also represent the El Dorado County Professional Firefighters Association, the labor group that works with El Dorado County Fire. More or less, I'm going to echo quite a bit that Councilman Thomas already mentioned, but the El Dorado County Professional Firefighters, we do value that relationship and that trust that we have going with the city. And Councilman Thomas did bring up Measure L. We did choose not to compete with that measure at the time. Not only that, but we did send our folks out canvassing neighborhoods and going door to door and knocking on doors to get that passed. And that's because we do value that relationship. I do want to just touch on a couple of things that maybe didn't get mentioned or that are important, or that we as the firefighters feel that are important. It was mentioned that that is a 2/3 majority vote necessary to pass Measure B. And the reason for that is we've got a pretty close relationship with the folks we take care of, and it was very important to them that if we were going to go out and ask for funds, that those be locally controlled. And the CAL FIRE or state area tax is still fresh in people's minds, and that money was not necessarily going locally to their own local fire districts. Whereas this Measure B with a 2/3 majority vote will be going directly to their local fire department. So we definitely wanted folks to know that that was the case. Also, one other thing that I don't know that it got mentioned, in addition to the staffing increase is what we're really looking for. It's also going to provide a guaranteed paramedic on every apparatus that responds district-wide for us. Right now, we use both paramedics and EMTs. For those that may or may not know the difference, a paramedic is able to do advanced life support skills, whereas an EMT does basic skills. So advanced life support skills meaning things like inserting an advanced airway, starting an IV, giving IV life-saving drugs, things of that nature. So we definitely want to provide an increased level of service with the fee that we're asking for. So this will guarantee no matter what apparatus shows up at your house, whether it be ambulance or fire engine, it's going to have a paramedic on it as well. And just to provide a little extra background on the staffing. Right now, as you know, or you may not know, we do send fire engines to other communities when they are in need. So we sent folks to Paradise for the campfire. We sent folks to Santa Rosa. When an engine leaves the county, we're not allowed to send it out with 2 firefighters, which is, as you've heard, 4 of our 6 engines in the county are only staffed with 2. If it's a Type 1 engine, that is an engine that protects homes. We have to add 2 firefighters before it can leave. And then when it comes back to serve El Dorado County and the city of Placerville, we take 2 firefighters back off of it. If it's a Type 3 engine, which takes care of wildland fires, those also only have 2 when they're here, and they have to add a firefighter to get a total of 3 to serve other communities. And then when it gets home, we remove that firefighter again. So it's pretty important for not only the safety of our firefighters, but also the safety of our community to increase that staffing level. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak to you all. I don't know if you have any questions for me.
No, thank you very much. We appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Is there any other member of the public wishing to address this item? Yes, sir. Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. Mickey Kaiserman. I'm the director on the El Dorado County Fire Protection District representing Placerville. I'm familiar with this tax measure. I just want to also make note that not only does it require a 2/3 vote, but we have a citizens oversight committee that we're going to be putting in place to review how the funds are spent. And as this city lives by sales tax dollars, the Fire Protection District lives by property taxes. And as you know, at the economic downturn, property taxes went down because of short sales, people selling their houses for lower values. And then once those property owners purchased those houses, the property tax increase is only nominally going up by 2% a year. So if they were at this high base up here and it dropped down, they still have not reached that level of revenue that they had at the time of the height. So I just wanted to make that aware. And I know Dave Warren, he lives by sales tax, and he's laughing, but it's true. And so we live by property taxes, and that's why this property tax that we're asking for is really appropriate. Thanks.
Thank you, Mickey. Appreciate your comments. Another member of the public wishing to address the council on this item?
Kurt Smith.
Good evening, Kurt.
Over the years, maybe a dozen or so, had experience with older parents to see a lot of the EMTs in this community, and I'll always be grateful. Exceptional work provided by the fire department, certainly in this area, and watching CAL FIRE over the years, fighting fires, really top professionals. So there's really no doubt about needing more money. The disappointment was that I wouldn't have known, listening to the presentation, that this was about raising taxes and the method doing it, because I understood that they were going to base the fee on parcels, and parcels aren't the same size. We have some that are hundreds of acres and some that are incredibly small. So I don't know how that would be addressed. Again, those are the specifics I'd like to hear, because on the highlights, you know, about how it's going to increase safeguards for enhancing safety and all that, it's like saying, are you in favor of motherhood and apple pie? Those are all good things, but I'd like to have heard more about specifics. One of the big problems we've had with firefighting in the area is Proposition 13. So the property tax has been tremendous disparity. So you have some place like El Dorado Hills, which has plenty of money for their fire department, and others that have, you know, all but gone out of business. So those kind of details would have been helpful to learn more about. Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. Another member of the public wishing to address the council? Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor Acuna and members of the council. Because the city gave up its fire department to form the district, and then later didn't have enough money to pay the agreement, the city has given up the majority of its property tax to the fire district. I'm interested in knowing how the fire district is funded and what portion of that comes from the city. And I haven't seen in a long time anything telling me how much property tax from the city goes to the fire district. The CAL FIRE fee, I was under the impression they don't charge anybody that anymore. We are 1% of the 300 miles, because we're only 6 square miles. So we're more populated, but we're a smaller area. And I just want to see that everything is fair to the city. I am in favor of the parcel tax. I'm also wondering, is it indefinite? Does it sunset, or does it just keep going on? And you talked about the fact that it's going to go up. I don't believe that any of the well, we didn't do property tax, we did sales tax, but how much could it go up in the long run over the years? And, you know, there's no, it's just the information, and this absolutely is the first time I've heard about it. So I'm just someone who always likes to get information. And the capital improvement, we need a new police department, and they need a new fire department. Maybe we could go together.
Thank you for those comments, Kathy. Appreciate your interest in this important item. Is there another member of the public that wishes to address the council? Seeing no one else approaching the podium, I'm going to ask Chief Ogun to come up for just a couple quick clarifications, if you could. There was the issue about sunsetting on this item.
So this item does not sunset because the need is not going to go away. So we chose not to sunset it because we felt like if we sunsetted it, and based upon our consultants' input, if we sunsetted it, we actually end up costing the community more money if we've got to come back and do a renewal of it. So we chose not to sunset it.
Thank you, Chief. And then so that would lead to the next question is, unless you came back to the voters, this would remain a $96 fee per parcel.
Yep. So let me clarify the part about it escalating. So as the property taxes escalate, obviously the dollar amount would escalate with it. So yeah, it's a $96 per parcel fee.
Okay. And then the last question was a concern by the gentleman regarding large parcels and small parcels. What was your consultant, what's the department's thought on one fee fits all of the parcels?
Yeah, so that gets into benefit assessment, and then it made it a little bit more complicated. So their recommendation to us was to keep it as simple as possible and apply just a single fee across all parcels.
Great, thank you very much. I think I can get the other information from Mr. Warren as regards to the operating costs that the city contributes currently.
So one other thing, we are doing town hall meetings around the district, and we are attempting right now to schedule one in Placerville. So if you watch our website, watch our social media, we will be pushing out that date, and we will be holding a town hall here in Placerville, which will give us more opportunity with about an hour and a half to get into the real details.
No, great. That's good news. Please share that information with us.
We will.
Thank you again, Chief. Mr. Warren, can you answer that? That's a common question. The regards to the annual payment, because what happens is that many years ago the city entered into an agreement that we transfer our fair amount of our property tax as a payment for the fire services that we do receive here in Placerville. What's the current figure, Mr. Warren?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. So as of fiscal year 17-18, the estimated amount of property tax paid within the city limits to the district was $1,701,848. And for the following year, it would probably be around a little over, just below $1.8 million.
So approximately 1.8 in the upcoming payment
For 18-19.
18-19. So, Kathy, did you get that? That's a fairly common question. That's a sizable payment. Dave, do you happen to know what percentage of our property tax that represents?
It varies. There's different areas of the city that are taxed at a different rate, but it's approximately 13% of the increment.
13%.
Correct, is my
Okay.
understanding.
And the reason I bring that up is because over the years there's been rumors that it's as high as 50 or 60 or 70% of our property tax goes to the county fire department, or fire district, excuse me, and that's simply not true.
Just clarify this with you, Dave. The total of the 1% that the city gets is about 16%, and the fire district gets 13% of that. So we get 3, they get 13 of the 16% of the 1.
Of the
Is that
amount.
That's correct.
Correct?
Yes.
So
Sorry if I.
So let's make sure that we're clear on that. So what would that represent then? Again, in
3% of 16, whatever that
Well, the
is.
city
We get
currently
3.
receives in total property tax about $300,000.
and the balance goes to the county fire.
Right.
Right now, about 1.8 million goes to county fire.
Okay, great. So it costs, if we didn't have county fire, we'd have to hire somebody else. So this is not a service that's going away, and I don't want it to go away. I want it to be improved. This was not agendized asking for an endorsement by the city council. And unfortunately, the time of the ballot measure does not allow us, with the meetings that we have, to really get back, and we won't be back until, I believe, August 15th, which is our next agendized meeting. We could agendize it then, certainly as a show of support. 13th. Still well through your open ballot period. Your ballots close August 27th. But I certainly would entertain that later on this evening if somebody would like to do that. And I would just encourage the voters, my personal opinion would be that the fire district has always been there and provided an excellent service. For a small community, we're extremely blessed to have such a talented and dedicated group. Training and attitude makes a huge difference in a fire district. It saves lives and it saves property. We're very blessed to have a fire district that adopts that operational model. So I would encourage everybody to think very hard in supporting this effort in support Measure B. So with that, I think we need to move along. We have other business to do this evening, but we appreciate the opportunity to have you here and have the other members of your department and have you answer some follow-up questions for us also. That's not always an easy thing to do, so appreciate it. All right, well then we're going to move on to item 4 this evening, which is closed session report. Mr. Driscoll, did you have any items to report this evening?
Actually, the council did not take reportable action on the 2 items for closed session.
Thank you very much, sir. And the next item is item 5, adoption of the agenda. I would like to suggest, based on the members of the audience, that if we could consider moving item 12.7, which is in regards to the Veterans Memorial Building, if we could move that up to be heard as the first item under discussion and action items. If someone would be interested in making a motion to make that change.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? So we will be hearing item 12.7 when we get to discussion items at the beginning of that. So this brings us on to ceremonial matters. And I'm surprised I don't see National Night Out in the audience. But wait. Aha! Exit stage left. Or right. Good evening.
Good evening.
National Night Out just magically appeared. You had to wait for all the firefighter guys to get done talking. I'm sorry, Knight.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Robin Abear. I'm a community service officer with the Placerville Police Department.
My name is Bethany Ohm. I'm a community service officer with the Placerville Police Department as well.
Good evening. And of course, National Night, the night is the night. Yep. Good evening to all of you.
Thank you, Mayor Acuna and council members. National Night Out is an annual community building campaign that promotes police-community partnerships and neighborhood camaraderie to make our neighborhoods safer. National Night Out enhances the relationship between neighbors and law enforcement while bringing back a true sense of community. Millions of neighbors take part in National Night Out across thousands of communities from all 50 states, U.S. territories, and military bases worldwide. This occurs on the first Tuesday in August since 1984. Neighborhoods host block parties, festivals, parades, cookouts, and various other community events with safety demonstrations, seminars, youth events, visits from emergency personnel, exhibits, and much, much more. This year, the City of Placerville has 10 neighborhood and apartment complex gatherings and 3 large event locations. The large event locations bring together citizens from El Dorado County and the Placerville community. The National Night Out kickoff is at Lions Park. This will begin at 5 p.m. with all the other parties starting at 6 p.m. The City of Placerville, City Council, and the police will take part in visiting local community parties and help give citizens a chance to meet and engage with city and safety personnel on any questions that they may have. Hot dogs, chips, water will all be provided at these locations, along with fun and festive goodies and activities such as bounce houses and snow cones, community resources, and of course our favorite bubble master, Fairy Mary, who will be at Lions Park as well. The following streets and locations plan to have an event at National Night Out. The street locations this year will be Carson Ridge Apartments, Chamberlain Street, Moore, Northridge Drive, Oakcrest Circle, Orchard Hill Park, Placerville Apartments, Ronald Loop, Sunrise Gardens, and the Placer Village Apartments. Our 3 large party locations will be Lions Park, which is where our kickoff event will take place, Grocery Outlet, which was also going to be hosting a car show, and Sierra School, which is in conjunction with Bayside Church. If you live near or on one of these streets, please join your neighbors and celebrate our city, neighborhood camaraderie, and get to know your local police. If one of your streets is not mentioned, join us at any of our larger party locations. This is a family fun event. Please follow the Placerville Police Department on social media to find out more about the special events at each location. For those that are interested in donating towards National Night Out this year, we have set up a GoFundMe link, which is on our Facebook page. Thank you, and see you on August 6th. I'm also going to introduce Ms. Olm, who is overtaking the tobacco grant, which is going to be a huge piece of National Night Out as well.
All right. Thank you, Robin. Good evening.
Hello, Mr. Mayor and City Council members. Each year, as part of our National Night Out submission, we identify an area in the city that needs attention with the purpose to improve the overall quality of life in our community, called Project 365. We are pleased to announce this year that we have identified tobacco prevention and education as our Project 365. As you may know, the Placerville Police Department sought out and was awarded nearly $400,000 in a 3-year grant to help educate the public about the dangers of tobacco usage. Our goal is to inspire healthy, positive changes in our community, from our retailers to our schools. We have partnered with the Public Health Department to raise awareness about the addictive dangers of smoking and to start a campaign to end the influence of these silent poisons. Please stop by at our booth at Lions Park on National Night Out to learn more about the dangers of tobacco use and how we can help bring awareness to the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's a very important and prestigious tobacco grant. That's a significant amount of money, and we appreciate all the effort that went into obtaining that. And hopefully we'll have a huge positive impact on the entire community. Is there anything else? I have a proclamation to read. Is it my turn? All right. A proclamation of the City Council declaring August 6, 2019 as National Night Out. The National Night Out Association Town Watch is sponsoring a unique nationwide Lights Out campaign in celebration against crime, drug, and violence on August 6th. That whereas the 36th annual National Night Out provides a unique opportunity for the City of Placerville to join forces with 38 million people, over 16,000 communities from all 50 states, territories, Canadian cities, and military bases, in promoting cooperative police community crime prevention efforts. And whereas the City Council plays a vital role in assisting the Placerville Police Department through joint crime, drug, and violence prevention efforts in the City of Placerville, and is supporting National Night Out 2019 locally. And whereas it is essential that all citizens of the City of Placerville be aware of the importance of crime prevention programs and the impact that their participation can have on reducing crime, drugs, and violence in Placerville. Whereas police community partnerships, neighborhood safety, awareness, and camaraderie are important themes of the National Night Out program. Now, therefore, I, Mark Acuna, as Mayor of the City of Placerville, hereby do proclaim Tuesday, August 6, 2019, as National Night Out in the City of Placerville, and urge all of our citizens of Placerville to join the Placerville Police Department, the National Association of Town Watch, and their sponsors in supporting this 36th annual National Night Out. It's my pleasure to present this proclamation. For the night's sake, let's hope that it's a cool night. I've seen the night have to take off for cover a couple of hot August nights. This is a very special time when I think it's a really nice evening for our Placerville Police Department to get a chance to relax and really get to go one-on-one with all of the folks that they serve, the folks that aren't necessarily at the end of some of these calls, but the people that really we rely on to keep our community safe. This is a chance for all the residents to say thank you and get to know them a little bit better And I know that goodwill goes a long way. So I look forward to everything that we're going to do this coming August 6th. So with that, we will move on to item 7, which is public comment. I usually get this backwards. Written comment. Mr. Morris, did we receive any new written comment this afternoon?
I do not believe we have any written.
All right, thank you, sir. Oral communications. This is the opportunity if any member of the public wants to address the city council on a non-agendized item, and that would be the time to approach the podium. And we would ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes and your subject matter to items that are pertinent to the business before the city council. Is there any member of the public wishing to address the council, non-agendized item? Please approach the podium, if you wouldn't mind stating your name.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and City Council members.
Thank you.
My name is Brent Sylvester. I'm a resident here in Placerville. What I'm wanting to discuss briefly is kind of dovetailing with a lot of the fire concerns that we're seeing in the area. As a resident in Placerville, I'm sure a lot of people have gotten the same mailing I've gotten from PG&E about brownouts. And I wanted to offer my services in the renewable energy sector to anybody on the board, to the city, and to residents otherwise to learn how they can safeguard themselves against future power outages. I know safety is a major concern, so we now have the technology, resources available to keep your lights on, keep your internet going when PG&E can't do it for us. So again, my name is Brent Sylvester. Just wanted to offer that to the council and to the community.
Well, thank you very much. And if we could at some point in the evening get your contact information to our city clerk, we'd appreciate it. We look forward to learning more about what you can do and PG&E can't. Is there another member of the public that wishes to address the council non-agendized item? Seeing no one else approaching the podium, I'll go ahead and close public comment for this evening. Move us on to consent calendar. Consent calendar is considered under one motion unless a council member wishes to have an item removed. Is there any items to be removed this evening on consent? Good night, gentlemen. Is there any member of the public that wishes to comment on a consent calendar item? Seeing no one approaching, I will go ahead and ask if there's a motion for the consent calendar's approval.
I'll move to approve it.
I'll second.
Moved by Councilmember Taylor, seconded by Councilmember Thomas. Let's see, roll call vote, please.
Mayor Acuna?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Zaragoza?
Aye.
Councilmember Taylor?
Aye.
Councilmember Thomas?
Aye.
All right, thank you very much. This moves us on to a very important item on this evening's agenda, and that's item 10.1. Introduce the Placerville Hazardous Vegetation and Combustible Material Abatement Ordinance and waive the first reading of the said ordinance. Cleve, I believe you have the report on this ongoing effort. Now, I believe we're probably in the month, probably 5 or 6, which is good because that means we've had lots of public input.
It's had been a while. I'm going to run through this brief presentation that I did. Do you have the clicker, Dave? Want to thank all those who have provided input to get us to where we are today. Been several people who have helped us with this. I want to recognize the Fire Safe Council, who's been very instrumental in helping us get this accomplished, so I really appreciate that. I'm going to run through this quickly just to kind of outline where we are, and then I'll ask the city attorney if he has anything that he can add also. He was very instrumental in helping us develop this and put together something that we think will work for our community. So just briefly, the purpose is to basically remove hazardous vegetation, combustible materials so that we reduce the fire risk within our city and promote public safety and welfare of the community. So briefly, what we have come up with, what this ordinance defines in terms of defensible space is primarily the 30 feet around your home or parcel or your building structure on your parcel. Grass needs to be cut to 6 inches or less. For trees 20 feet tall or less, branches limbed up to 6 feet. For trees more than 20 feet tall, limbed up to 10 feet. So we made it. That's a change from what we've looked at previously. We tried to define that. Shrubs maintained That's a simple description of a little bit more detail that's in the ordinance. No climbing vines is spelled out in the ordinance. 10-foot clearance from roadsides, 10-foot clearance from chimneys. Eliminate dead or dying trees and shrubs. Maintain roofs and gutters free of debris. Install a spark arrestor on your chimney. Install address numbers on your home. Remove dead and dying vegetation. I think I had that one in there twice, maybe. And then maintain property free of ladder fuels. That's just kind of a general description of what we're looking at in terms of the defensible space. That's for improved property. For unimproved property, if you're under 2 acres, you basically should maintain the property similar to that you would for improved property if it's under 2 acres. If it is over 2 acres, you have a choice. You can either maintain it clear as if it were improved the same way, or you can install either a shaded or unshaded fire break. A shaded fire break is one where you remove most of the, if not all of the undergrowth, and then you remove some of the trees to create spacing that will reduce the fire risk within that area. That's what's defined as a shaded fire break. An unshaded fire break is basically you scrape or disc the ground 30 feet around the perimeter of the property, and you remove everything, trees, shrubs, everything. So it's a clear fire break that's disked down to the dirt. Fire breaks can be required for more than the 30 feet based on the recommendation of the fire chief or the director of development services, who are defined as the enforcement officials for the ordinance. Just quickly, a couple of things. These have been in there before. The good neighbor policy. I don't know that this has a lot of enforcement behind it, but it's something that is in our ordinance just to encourage neighbors to work together in cases where homes are closer together and there may be property definitely within the 100 feet and possibly within 30 feet of your home that is not maintained properly. Hopefully neighbors will work together and make that safe within that defensible space area. Another provision in here is prior to close of real estate transaction within the city requires property owners to comply with the ordinance, and that has to be disclosed to potential buyers, so that information will be disseminated to real estate agencies also. A couple of quick diagrams that these are ones that we've shown before. We've modified slightly. Again, this just goes through and shows what your property, the things that you should look at on your property in order to make it a defensible space around your property. And these are kind of a repeat of what I already went through on defensible space, so I won't read through each one of these. But they are in this presentation. There's copies of the presentation on the back table for the public if any of you would like to look at those. Again, more of the diagram and what is required there. Inspection, this is an issue that has come up in the past a little bit. And basically what we're saying, if there is no reasonable expectation of privacy, in other words, if it can be seen from the road or if it is abandoned property, then the enforcement officer can go on there. However, if where there is an inhabited dwelling and or a portion of the property require entering upon the property for inspection, the enforcement officer shall obtain legal consent or an inspection warrant prior to entering on the property. So we revised that slightly to clarify that we don't have the right just to go on at any time. So abatement, if there is abatement is required, you would receive a notice that there's weeds that need to be removed, and they will have 15 days normally to remove. They'll give them a date, normally 15 days out, that they have to remove the weeds. Obviously, we will work with people. If it's going to take them longer, if they're working cooperatively with us, then we'll give them more time to do that. If they refuse, we have the right to remove the weeds or rubbish, whatever is required, at the owner's cost, and can include placing a lien on the property to make that collection. There is an appeal process that's outlined in the ordinance. Each notice has a right to appeal. And then if necessary, depending on if it's not inhabited and it's difficult to notify the owner, there's a process where we can actually post signs on the property and notice that it will be abated if it is not cleaned up. Summary abatement proceedings, this is just a proceeding where if there's an immediate health and safety issue, they can go through that abatement process. The enforcement officer in the city can go through the abatement process without the notice hearing that would normally be required. This just outlines the appeal process. If you want to appeal, they can appeal within 15 days of receiving the notice. We then schedule a hearing within 15 days of that. The hearing officer then holds the hearing and considers it, and then either denies or grants the appeal within 15 days. If the appeal is denied, the parcel owner then has 7 days to abate the weeds and the nuisance that's on the property. And this other provision, the seasonal designation, if there's a property that has been a problem, contains a fire hazard, an abatement has occurred in 2 previous years, then the next year they can abate that without going through the full hearing process that's required for the normal abatement. And then there is an assessment hearing. For example, if we're going to place liens on the property, there's a hearing that we would come to the city council and do an assessment, and all properties would be noticed of that going forward. Violations, this just counts as the violation of the chapter as an administrative violation, and then you can see the fines there. Fine not exceeding $100 for the first violation, $200 for the second, and so forth, $500 for the third, and each additional violation going forward within the same year. So that's just a quick description. We've tried to take all the input that we have received from the public, from the Fire Safe Council and others that have had an interest in this. And I think we could go on for a long time and try to wordsmith this forever, but I think we've come pretty close to trying to reach something that we can enforce and that we think will help us create a safer community for our public. So with that, before I take questions, John, was there anything you wanted to add that I missed in that process?
I think that you covered just about everything. The only thing I would add is, in addition to the lien procedure for the collection of abatement costs that might be expended by the city, there's an alternative procedure where those costs can be placed on the tax rolls as an assessment and collected with the real property taxes. So that's in the ordinance. And the only thing I would add to what Cleve said is that, as with any law, its enforcement is going to be the key, and how it's enforced, and discretion and use of good judgment in the enforcement of those laws are going to be I think the most important thing.
One other final point I would like to make in our final review, the city attorney and I, in section 716.6, which is the abatement of vegetation and combustible material, item what would be A9 is can be removed. That section says remove all tree limbs necessary to create 10 feet clearance from the ground. That is actually addressed under 1B, where we address the issue of trees less than 20 feet and those over 20 feet. So I would recommend that we just remove item A9 in that section. It's no longer necessary. And with that, we'll take any questions.
Thank you, Cleve. Ask the council to, if there are any questions at this time on what has been presented. Sure.
Yeah, sure. I've got a question. So I've gone back and forth with the city manager about climbing vines, which I think this document is great and it's really well needed. And I do take a little issue with getting rid of all climbing vines in the city because we have some really iconic buildings that are covered in them. So my question is for 13, under that same section, where it says this section does not apply to a single specimen of trees or other vegetation that are well pruned and maintained. Would that override A1D, where it says, would climbing vines be treated as a single specimen if they were well maintained?
All right.
We need to-
That's where what I just mentioned about discretion and judgment comes into play. I mean, if you want to say technically, if you read the ordinance in a very literal manner, you're going to say climbing vines can be considered ladder fuel.
Right.
They can be dangerous. But you got to look at it in the context, and hopefully the enforcement officer will do this, in the context of what it's intended to do. And when you have manicured and, single species, it's that sort of thing, it may not constitute a fire hazard. On the other hand, if it does for some reason, then it's going to be an issue. But somebody's got to use good judgment in enforcing this.
Okay.
Anything else?
Well, along that point, I would maybe recommend
Do you have a?
changing the language a little bit for section 1AD to say poorly maintained or overgrown climbing vines must be removed from trees and structures if the council. Just
It
a minor,
does,
just a minor thing. Everything else is great about this ordinance. I'm happy with it, and we definitely need it in our community.
I would be okay with that, too.
It does address the point. And you did bring a suggestion, so I like that. So hang on to that wording, please. Let's see if, Dennis, did you have any questions for where we are at the proceedings? Michael, any questions for what's been presented? No. All right, thank you very much. Any further thoughts before I open public comment on this, Mr. Morris? Okay, great. Well, first of all, thank you everybody for being here this evening, and thank you for all the hard work that's gone into this effort. And I will go ahead and open public comment for item 10.1, which is the hazard vegetation and combustible materials abatement ordinance. We got to come up with a snappier name than that, though. Good evening, Sue.
Good evening. Sue
Welcome back.
Rodman, Placerville resident, and I've been on this one ever since it started. And we're down, and the work that's been done is very good. There are only a few other things. So and I go straight to the ordinance itself. 7-16-4 definitions. Definition D says combustible material fuel includes an accumulation of hazardous vegetation, garbage, rubbish, waste, or material of any kind other than hazardous vegetation. Hello, I think that other than hazardous vegetation needs to come out of that sentence. So it would read then, combustible material fuels includes an accumulation of hazardous vegetation, garbage, rubbish, waste, or material of any kind that is flammable and endangers the public safety by creating a fire hazard. I think that's a lot clearer. Then we can move
Hang
down
on just a
to-
second. Sue, I want to make sure we've captured that. We got
I
it.
got Sue's comments.
Okay.
She was
okay.
kind enough to send them to us. and
Thank
so
you.
just
I'm sorry,
following
Sue. I
on that.
didn't mean to interrupt you. Please continue.
That's okay. Then under section I, the same thing, definitions under I, since the emphasis for this ordinance is hazardous vegetation needs to be the first item in this list. And so it should say, fuel means any combustible material, including hazardous vegetation and/or petroleum-based products, instead of petroleum-based products first.
Thank you.
Then under 7-16-12, hazard abatement notice. This is another one where we need to include the term hazardous vegetation in those lists. So in the statement B, that there are weeds, rubbish, or refuse on the property, I think it needs to say a statement that there is hazardous vegetation, weeds, rubbish, or refuse on the property. And hazardous vegetation then needs to be added to items C and D so that they would read C, a notice that such hazardous vegetation, weeds, rubbish, or refuse be removed or abated by a date certain on. And then under D, it should also say a statement that the hazardous vegetation, weeds, rubbish, or refuse may be removed under authority of the city, etc. But since it is the hazardous vegetation ordinance, I think we need to make sure that it's clear in all those things that it does list it.
Well, thank you, Sue. You know, the more times you work on something, the more things become invisible and your eye slides right past. I like the part where we were removing the hazardous vegetation under the definition. More eyes can create a better product. Mr. Driscoll, did you care to comment?
I was just going to comment on, okay, city manager like to do the rest of the public comment.
Yes, I would too. But you're high up on my important person list. Is there another member of the public that wishes to address the council on our pending hazardous vegetation management plan?
Mickey Kaiserman, I'll be as a citizen tonight.
Good evening, Mickey.
And I sent this to Cleve. I think in paragraph 7 on the unimproved property, we need the definition of what a shaded or unshaded fire break is, because it's not in the definitions. It's in his presentation tonight, but I don't think it's presented in the ordinance.
Thank you, Mickey. That's the kind of thing that will come back and create a question. So the recommendation is to add shaded and unshaded. Is there another member of the public that wishes to address the council on item 10.1?
Good evening again, Kathy Lishman. I think this is a good compromise. I think it's very reasonable. I had some questions. On the defensible space one where it says the grass needs to be cut 6 inches or less, is that dry grass or green grass? And then also, if grass is 6 inches tall and it's dry, it's not a fire hazard? I would think it would be. On the climbing vines, I was under the impression at first that it was just going to be climbing vines on a house, or climbing vines near a house, or climbing vines on a wooden structure. So I just wondered if that can be clarified a little more. On the defensible space, it says improve parcels 30 feet of dispensable space, defensible space. Then it goes on to say the good neighbor policy is 100 feet. And if the property line is 70 feet from a structure of your neighbors, our property lines are probably 6, 10, 15 feet, which means that then you're responsible on your property for your neighbors 85 feet. That just doesn't make sense to me in a small community. That I know it's not required. And in one place in the county's ordinance, it says, just a sec, and I know a lot of this is, the verbiage is the same as the county's. So it says, maintain defensible space of 100 feet from each side and from the front and rear of the structure, but not beyond the property line except as provided in paragraph M. Well, their paragraph M is the good neighbor policy. So it kind of, I don't know, it seems like it's kind of contradicting itself. Bark chunks, I wasn't sure if that was described. I mean, bark is used in a lot of landscaping, and I'm not sure how big bark chunks are. And let me see. Oh, this is front and back. One of the things the county has in theirs that says the public and entities shall be aware of rare plant areas, riparian areas, and raptor nesting trees on the property and try to avoid these sites. I read through ours, but I wasn't sure if that was in it because I didn't read every word of it. But I think that that's important. And also we have heritage trees that I don't know how that would be considered. The Sacramento is a city of trees. They're not in a forest area. But here's something that the Sacramento Tree Foundation said that we need to keep in mind at the same time. A healthy tree canopy provides cleaner air and cooler temperatures, replenishes groundwater, enhances public health, and creates vibrant, livable neighborhoods. As our climate becomes hotter and drier, our urban forest will be even more valuable. And then they go on to say, learn how to save water and protect the trees that you have. I know someone who cut down tons of things just to satisfy her insurance company, and her place is kind of an eyesore. And it's not shaded and cool anymore, and there's a lot to be said for trying to maintain a lot of the shade that we have.
Thank you for your comments, Kathy. Is there another member of the public that wishes to address the council on this item?
I promise not to do this too many times in the future. Hi, John Clarici, citizen of Placerville. I've been asked to be on the Fire Council. Thank you very much. I actually missed the first meeting.
Congratulations.
You're welcome. I want to speak a little bit to what Kathy said and kind of to the ordinance. I read through the ordinance. I read through the stuff. It's fine, you know. If you have a fire where clinging vines are catching on fire, the building inside has probably already ignited. The air inside of it gets real hot. That's how a lot of buildings burn down in big fires, is they get hot on the inside and they just blow up. So if you're talking about nuances of things like that, you might want to have them in your ordinance because you don't want to have a bunch of crummy things out there, but you might also just want to think about what you're trying to accomplish. The other thing, too, is we live in an environment that was built for fire. All the natural species around here were all evolved around fire. You're fighting kind of an uphill battle against nature, and nature almost always wins that. I would like to see defensible space diagrams that aren't put on a piece of land that's flat as a pancake, because very few places like that in Placerville actually exist. I think that the defensible space notion becomes a lot more challenging when you get into topography. In fact, I even put a question to some of my comrades here about if you limb up a tree to 6 feet and the tree that's 10 feet above it is limbed to 6 feet and the tree above that is limbed to 6 feet, you have a ladder fuel, because the trees are all progressively higher than the last one, and if the bottom one catches on fire, the fire just runs uphill through the trees. I would take my ordinance and drive around town before I enacted it and say, who would this apply to? Because you might find some really nicely kept gardens in this town that may very well violate your ordinance, because they'll have like shrubs and layers and stuff, and even though they'll be green, they may actually violate it. I don't know that for sure, but that's what I would do. Let's see. I was thinking a couple things. Shade is very important. Okay? It modifies the environment. Those shrubs above my house, I live at the bottom of a slope, keep that hill in place. All those roots, the manzanita, the tan oak, everything that's above me, I'm not cutting them down. I don't care how many ladder fuels there are, because the threat of a flood and a mudslide are far greater to me than the threat of a wildfire. So you got to just think about all those things. We don't live in a flat place. I'd like to see diagrams that have that. I'd like to see that ordinance actually ground truth before it's enacted, to make sure that we're getting to the people that aren't taking care of their properties, and there's plenty of those, as opposed to folks that have really nice yards that might actually violate your ordinance. Fires are big things. The wrong fire will burn any town down. The only defensible space there actually is in a community that's under a hard fire is a giant parking lot. Go to Paradise. The places that didn't burn were giant parking lots, because that's where everybody went. That's where they gathered, because those are the safest places. Everything else in that town burned to the ground. So anyway, sorry to be a bummer, but it's a good ordinance and it should be enacted. I just say ground truth and make sure you're not going to piss people off.
Kirk Smith, it is an ordinance that could be enacted some other night, and I'd love to see it some other night. It's one of those occasions when, like Warner Wolf, I'd like to say, roll the tape. Because for the last 6 months, I remember a number of times when this has come up for discussion, the comment was always made, we're going to take care of this next year. We're not going to rush through it. It's going to be next year. That's January plus. So no matter how you calculate it, 60 days to get adopted after it's read the second time, it needs to be, to keep your word, next year. That's number one. I do think it needs a lot more work. For example, again, to specificity. I've yet to hear an explanation for why you need to waive the right to have a search warrant. I've never heard a case on all fours mentioned so far. If there is one, it'd be nice to hear it. The next thing is about the right of appeal. Please don't tell us that the Constitution provides for it. If we don't know that, we shouldn't be in this room. But the question is, whether it actually does it in substance. It's not just a name, but ultimately there's no discretion beyond what the city has. If the city says this is a fire hazard, that's it. So if I, for example, went out and had the fire chief or CAL FIRE to come in and inspect the property, and they gave me a list of things to do, X, Y, and Z, the city comes in and can come up with a whole list that's different in juxtaposition to what the expert said, and it's the city's answer that's going to comply. In addition, I can just tell you as a practical matter that getting people to do these jobs, especially during the June to August, is really tough. 2 years in a row, 2 different teams to come in, and they haven't done the work on time. If you reach somebody who was a senior citizen with a fixed income and you require them to remove a tree or something like that, do you think you can do it in 15 days? It's tough at best. The word reasonable is nowhere in this ordinance, and it should be. So as it is now, the old maxim that the court's going to look at substance over form, it doesn't matter what you call it. You can say it's a right of appeal. I can't see what you'd have to appeal. So it really does deserve more care. And those are the concerns. Again, if you had more time, give a fixed date when you're going to come up with final passage. But if this is it, it seems like it's far off from the mark. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Kirk. Is there another member of the public wishing to address the council on 10.1? Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Marion Washburn, Placerville resident and board member of Placerville Fire Safe Council. Some of the issues that Mr. Clerici was raising, I think, are probably thoughts that are going to go through everyone's mind once this is enacted, that there's certain aspects that kind of, I think, defy people's imagination as far as the reality of clearing your property to the 30-foot or 100-foot extent. And maybe I can share with you what we did at the Fire Council meeting when it met last. There was a woman from Pollock Pines who is a fire safe linchpin, I guess. She seems extremely knowledgeable, and she showed the meeting group a video of the origins of those numbers of foot designations, the 100-foot, why the 100-foot, why the 30-foot. And the video was put on by University of Nevada at Reno, who had done extensive research after the Tahoe fires, the Aurora fires, and their conclusion after doing the research was that 100-foot and 30-foot range were really the effective thresholds of what would save your house if you did it. I still have a difficult time imagining that it is in fact doable, but it does seem like maybe the city could put a link to that particular video with that proof of the effectiveness. And it was also explained to us that in order to do these things, it's a very long process. You're not necessarily going to go out for reasons of cost and just manual labor and bring it off immediately. It takes a long time to really adjust your property in that way effectively. So it seemed like that vision, I think, helped me at least understand what I could do with my property that was kind of within the spirit, if not, probably not the letter of the law, but the spirit of it. And if you could somehow make that known to the public, I think it would explain a great deal, which would otherwise seem like it's just too prohibitive and too draconian. So I would make that recommendation if you could possibly bring that off. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marion. Another member of the public wish to address the council on item 10.1? Good evening, Mrs. Zito.
Good evening. I wasn't here for this.
Welcome back to our chamber.
Thank you. I promised myself I wasn't going to be back here, but here I am. And I wasn't even here for this item, actually, but in addition to what Marion said, when I retired, one of my bucket list things was to become a certified master gardener, which I did a few years ago. The link that I think would be very helpful is the University of California Agricultural and Natural Resources. It's UCANR. And the UCANR site has the Fire Safe Council, CAL FIRE's recommendations with pictures of where a house sits with a 30-foot defensible space. It's a very good illustration of visually, when you're talking about numbers, 30 feet, 70 feet, 100 feet, it'll show you, and it's not just the limbing up of trees, it's the spacing of your vegetation. So the plants are no more than 6 to 10 feet from each other. So it means clearing a lot of things away. So you have freestanding vegetation that's limbed up, so you're not creating those fuel ladders. But the UCANR website gives you quite a bit of information about defensible, fire-safe landscaping on your property.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Is there another member of the public wishing to address the council on item 10.1? Seeing no one else approaching the podium, I'll go ahead and close public comment and bring it back to the council. I would like to ask the council to focus on the additional information and suggested corrections that have been presented. And then let me ask the city attorney or city manager. I'm going to think that given some of this wording, we need to probably make those corrections and bring an improved document back.
It depends on how many of those you want to make. Some of those we talked about early on, I think we were comfortable with moving forward, but if there's more of those that you want to make, then it probably would require us to go back and make sure we get the wording right and et cetera. So.
All right. What's the wishes of the council? What are your thoughts? This has been a collaborative effort. We've gotten some very good information consistently from a wide range of community members, and I think we've heard some more good suggestions this evening. The time to implement this ordinance is not in August when it's 100 degrees and you're going to create a massive fire risk trying to clear a fire risk. So we barely have time. I envision seeing this being ready to go when the weather turns. We will have an early fall. That's my prediction. So, or we will have fall. That would be nice. We'll start with that. So given that's when this work really should commence, we still have just a little window of time to make another run at this. I like Kara's suggestion about a couple of those identifications on being clearer on the vines.
I also liked Sue's, a number of Sue's Rodman's suggestions as well for adding hazardous vegetation language to certain spots.
Those are excellent duplications where we gain consistency by restating ourselves as we go through the ordinance, adding the definitions
and deleting other than hazardous vegetation from section D of 16.4.
Can I address that one for a minute?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a problem with doing that, but when I first saw Sue's suggestion on that, I thought, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because that didn't seem to be flow right. It seemed to be counter. And then I started looking at some other ordinances that we had looked at and modeled after, and all of them had that in there. And I thought, well, there's got to be a reason for that then. What am I missing? Well, what I was missing is that hazardous vegetation has its own definition. And so that's why they excluded that definition from combustible material. I don't think it's absolutely necessary to have that in there, and I think it is kind of confusing, so we can eliminate that. But I wanted to kind of just touch on why that was still there. And what I was going to indicate after Ms. Rodman made her comments is that, you know, her changes are fine. We can make all of those very easily, and they don't affect the substance of the ordinance.
So those would be considered minor editorial changes this evening without having to, all right. Yeah. Dennis? Michael?
I think my only comment would be that when you're doing something like this, I'm hesitant to create very definite specificity. We can issue guidelines after the fact within the regulations themselves, but when there's too much specificity, I think within the regulation, you actually can cause more problems because you're trying to find every anomalous item out there. And so regulations are specifically not necessarily that specific. And sometimes that causes issues too. But we can have a general guideline because under this scenario and what we're trying to achieve is that the enforcement officer would have some the ability to make good decisions and to live within the spirit of the law. And were areas where it didn't make sense, where we had to have something done, that we would take the appropriate action. And so I think there should be some generality within the within what we're trying to adopt here, and not try to account for every single item that may be out there, because invariably we're going to miss something, and we're also going to just have people doing it to that exact specification, where there may be a situation where that exact specification still doesn't work. So I'm hesitant to make something go forward with that much specificity, if that makes sense to everybody else.
Do you have specific parts that are
well, even the vines. I mean, I don't know that we have to have something exclusive about vines that's that specific. I think that's going to be up to the enforcement officer to see if it makes sense for that particular building. And then, like I said, we can have guidelines that we can go through if there's still more confusion about it, about what generally makes sense. But I just think that if we get too specific, it's going to end up causing us unforeseen problems going forward.
For some reason, however, vines have been put in. Vines have been an enemy ever since we began.
Yeah, I mean, and I just thought that's what we've been talking about.
I never saw them that way until now, but...
I think specifics are helpful, though, for community members that are reading this and wondering how they should go about making changes to their property to have it clearly laid out. But I do agree that we want our enforcement officer to be able to look at a situation and be like, that's not specifically laid out in this document, but it's dangerous, or, you know, this document says this, but it's not really dangerous in this situation, and to be able to have that.
Yeah, I mean, and agreed. And I think, you know, if we lived in Irvine or in a big tract community like Natomas, where you can have a lot more specificity when it comes to what a community will look like, what a neighborhood looks like, because they kind of all look alike already. But in Placerville, we have great topography differences and a lot of different areas. We have very few tract houses around this area, so we're always going to run into this problem if we try to make it too specific, I think. And so that's just, I think, I don't know if there's any example right now, but I just think as a general guidance, that's what we should be looking at.
All right, Dennis, any thoughts? I'm going to spout off here for a couple of minutes, but I'll check with you first.
I would like to move this item forward. I believe that it absolutely does not address every issue that we have in this city, and we could, every time we kick this down the road another time, modify it, we're going to come up with, and Sue, I am amazed at how well you can come up with, every time we bring this back, more things. And I think if we do that going forward, we will continue to do that, and there'll be good changes too. And I don't believe that those are bad. And at some point, we have to move this forward. And while we have much of the substantive issues addressed here, you know, I got family members saying, what do I do with this? What do I do with that? Well, it really doesn't. I mean, if you really look at it, there's going to be a whole lot of pain for some people when it comes to this. There's no way that that many residents in this community are going to be able to address this over the next 1 to 2 or 3 years because of the severity of overgrowth in their property and their lack of ability to afford it. No matter how much you try and force this upon them, they will not be able to afford it. And so that is one of my biggest concerns about this, and that doesn't mean that we shouldn't enact it and move it forward and work to address these issues in our community. I just know that it's going to be challenging for, I would say, many, maybe some. I really don't have a number.
For everybody.
Yeah.
Unless you happen to
I know.
own
I spent my
a tree
entire
company.
spring clearing 1 acre of my 7-acre property, and it was hurt a lot. And it was a lot of work, and I still have probably another 2 to 3 acres to clear to bring up to code. So it's a lot of work, and it's costly.
It's expensive.
And my concern is, It's not my concern. It's just a reality check that this is what we're going to need to address as we move forward. This doesn't address everything, and I think it's a very good product that we can be proud of as we move forward with this.
With that thought, or with those thoughts in mind, there were several good suggestions, and Sue is a professional proofreader and has saved us some serious errors in a time or two on some documents. So I appreciate her efforts. We've had the discussion to add into the definitions what a shaded and unshaded fire break is. Add that under the definition section. Is it currently there? So we should add. Can we add that as a minor?
We could. I thought after I
those are
reviewed
very
it,
valuable.
looked at it, I found it was explainable, and it's kind of a standard definition that's online. But that's why I didn't choose to put it in there. But we could.
I think it's a very useful tool. It's a environmentally sensitive tool. It does allow trees to do their job, holding soil and keeping fuel temperatures down.
Mm-hmm.
And so that should probably be in there.
May I make a suggestion, Mr. Mayor?
Sure.
If we're going to be adding language that isn't in there,
yeah,
other than and like a definition of shaded fire break, that's going to be a little more difficult to do and incorporate it into a first reading. I mean, Sue Rodman's comments are all just rearranging the words that are there for the most part, adding whether on the vines unmaintained and what was the word? Overgrown. That's not too bad of a deal. But when we start adding some lengthy definitions, it's going to be more difficult, I think, to have a first reading of an ordinance with those potential modifications. So I was thinking, and I mentioned this, Cameron Park did an ordinance, and then they followed it up with what Vice Mayor Saragosa was saying, guidelines. Maybe if you want to do guidelines, that's where you could put in a definition of shaded fire break, and we could still go ahead with this.
That would be very good, because it kind of goes to my couple of other points, and as it was mentioned by the newest member of the Fire Safe Council, Mr. Clarici, who's hiding back there now. What are we trying to accomplish? And I think in the early onset to this, we realized that we're trying to accomplish having a neighborhood or the community survive what we term the average wildland fire. Some of the things that Mr. Clarici mentioned are not the average wildland fire. They're a firestorm, where the firemen are leaving, and if you don't leave, you're putting yourself in great peril. You're not going to cut your way and trim your way out of saving any community from a firestorm, hence the term storm. So going back to what are we trying to accomplish, and it goes to what Dennis has also said, is how in the world are we going to do this? You can imagine that I have been getting just lots of phone calls and emails on parcels, the larger ones that have existed this way for decades, getting into the science of fuel loading. It's massive. These are pieces of property in town surrounded by older homes that literally need to have bulldozers taken to them now because they have been neglected for 30 and 40 years. How in the world are they going to walk into this by May 1st of 2020 when we think fire season will begin again next year? It's going to have there are going to have to be some guidelines. And even for myself, I live on about a quarter-acre lot, and it's 27 feet to my side property line. Well, how do I figure my 100 feet into them 27 feet? Do I do it all as zone 1? Do I do it as zone 2? Do I go over to my neighbors? Does my neighbor come over to me? I figured out a way where I could actually have my side trimmed, and my neighbor could declare that his 100 feet runs over into my yard and make me take out my vegetation so that, it can get crazy when you start to try and apply this thing out there in the real topography. So maybe knowing that we're going to follow this up with a set of guidelines, and the reality is that this risk has existed for decades in the foothills. And it was just the campfire that sadly destroyed an entire community and brought this to the forefront. We need to take calculated steps. I'm okay with adding that stuff to a guideline. A couple questions that I would like you to address, Mr. Driscoll, is Mr. Smith's concern about waiving their right to a search warrant. I didn't see that indicated at all.
No, I think what he's referring to is that under certain circumstances, the ordinance doesn't require that the enforcement officer get a search warrant. And that's where things are visible from a public place, from the street, for example, or where the property has clearly been abandoned. So there's nobody to get consent from. the search warrant applies to almost every other situation, although it doesn't even have to by law. The ordinance basically states that if you have a situation where you have materials on your property that constitute a fire hazard, and if it's an urgency situation, it's a nuisance. And state law, case law says that in that situation where it's exigent circumstances, you can enter upon private property to abate a nuisance. And so, it's the law. We have gone overboard, or an extra mile, let's put it that way, by saying, no, you can't go on that property if it's occupied. You have to get consent. So I think we've covered the issues there, quite frankly.
I thought so too, sir. Thank you. And then his concerns about the appeal, and really basically who would this appeal person be, and wouldn't it just be another city person backing up a city person? Do you have any comments to that, John?
In order for it to be due process, it has to be an impartial, independent hearing officer that's going to handle the appeal. We haven't designated who that is yet, but it would have to be somebody. Can't be the enforcement officer, for example.
Right.
So it's going to have to be somebody independent. It could be the city manager, for example, or it could be an independent party. A lot of jurisdictions have basically hearing officers that they use for different things whenever an appeal comes up. We have other appeal processes within our code, for example, administrative violations, those types of things. There's an appeal process on those, and there's a hearing officer. Usually what we do, go out and find somebody who is independent, objective, knowledgeable, and they're the hearing officer.
So could that also be included in the guidelines?
Sure.
Right, because I think I understood his point, is there isn't a clearly identified third-party impartial person.
Exactly.
And if a situation was that serious, I would think that the person, first of all, writing that violation would be the fire marshal, subject matter expert. It wouldn't be our building inspector that had an extra half hour to go out and look at somebody's complaint about weeds. It's not going to be, this is going to be a serious situation. It's going to have everybody's attention. If a situation is going to an immediate hazard, or an appeal process has gone that far, there's going to have been a lot of contact made with that property owner. Okay, so this is again something that we could put in a guidelines.
Sure, and that could be adopted by resolution of the council, which would be of force in effect then.
Sure, okay. So we can do some of this wordsmithing that's been pointed out this evening. Kara, thoughts on, what do you think?
I would like to move this ahead just so that people can start planning for what to do in the future, and I do think that it is just really important for the community. I've mentioned from the beginning, in the same comments from Dennis Thomas, that it is going to be really difficult for people, and we as a city and the fire safe councils do need to be looking at ways to find some sort of funding and assistance to people that need the help to get this work done. But I think that the first step is moving this forward.
Yeah. Is that a motion?
That's the motion, with the changes that we just discussed.
Mr. Mayor,
Sure.
it might be a good idea for me to go through the changes in the draft so that we have a record of those and we know exactly.
And I'm sure you kept track of those as we went through.
I think I got most of them.
All right, let's go through it. And that is very fair for the public, because this is, again, the council is adopting additional input from our
The motion,
from our
or
citizens.
the ordinance as introduced would contain the following changes in the draft. Section 716.6, paragraph A1D would read, climbing vines must be removed, unmaintained and overgrown climbing vines must be removed from trees and structures. Section 716.6A9 would be deleted. I'm kind of going backwards, but that's the order I happen to have them in. Then definitions, 716.4, subparagraph D, the definition of combustible material / fuel. The reference to other than hazardous vegetation would be deleted. In 716.4I, the definition of fuel, the term hazardous vegetation would be added to that definition. 716.12B, the term hazardous vegetation would be added to that sentence. Similarly, it would be done in subsections or paragraphs C and D. Hazardous vegetation would be added to those. I think that is it.
All right, so would that encompass your motion?
Yes.
All right, Councilmember Taylor has made a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Been moved and seconded. If there's no other discussion, questions for staff, I'll go ahead and ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Mayor
Oh, wait a minute.
Acuna?
Excuse me. Pardon me. We are introducing and waiving the first reading. So all those in favor of introducing the ordinance with the changes as noted by the city attorney and waiving the first reading. That was your motion, wasn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Seconded by Councilmember Thomas. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So this then begins the next reading of this will be at our meeting in August the 13th. And then how many days after that?
30 days.
Assuming it 30 days. So we have actually started, we'll call it the 60-day from tonight clock to adopting this ordinance and for it beginning its life out there in Placerville and helping to address this very serious issue. I again would like to thank all the members of the community that have consistently come out and helped us with this, the Fire Safe Council, and all the efforts that they did, and even getting the Fire Safe Council established in Placerville was a huge undertaking that took place right after the holidays. And thank you to David Zielinski and all of his group for their hard work on that. I am confident that it is a step towards making our community safer. So thank you all very much. All right. We will now move on to item 12. There are no public hearings, if you can believe that, this evening. It seems like that's what we just had. Moving on to item 12.7. I believe Mr. Warren wrote the staff report for this. Or Cleve, are you going to give it?
Either of them. I'll go ahead and give it, and
Thank you,
Dave,
sir.
you can chime in if you'd like to. This is regarding a request from the representatives of the veterans in the community to adopt a resolution to remove a section in the Placerville Preferred Vision Plan, which states that the Veterans Building on Placerville Drive at 100 Placerville Drive could become a multimodal center in the future. Staff reviewed this. As you know, we've had several discussions about this, and although we feel that that is not the plan and it would not happen in the future, we want to express our support for the veterans and that location, and I want to thank the mayor for his negotiations and work on this to put together with the veterans, with Mr. Nelson and this resolution, which would remove that language reference to that being a multimodal center. And so it's staff's recommendation that we adopt this resolution. I just want to clarify, we did get a note from Mr. Nelson today about the address, but I think we have the address right in the resolution. It's 100 Placerville Drive, so I don't think there's any change that's necessary there. So with that, it is our recommendation that we adopt the resolution, which will remove that language from the Placerville Drive visioning plan. And myself, Mr. Warren, our Development Services Director, Pierre Rivas, any of us can answer questions on that if you have any.
Thank you very much, Cleve. Is there any questions from the council on item 12.7?
How much staff time was spent on this, dealing with this issue in terms of days? Could you give me a rough idea?
I don't know. I know I was actually on vacation when it was happening, so I spent less than Mr. Warren and perhaps Mr. Rivas, and I know our city attorney spent a little bit of time also. I don't know that we really have an estimate. There were several hours that were spent on it, but Dave,
The mayor spent the lion's share of time for communication pieces, but staff probably spent a good day at least on this.
Collectively?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor? Karen?
I don't have any questions.
All right, very good. Then I'll open public comment on this item. Is there any member of the public wishes to comment on item 12.7, which is removing the wording regarding reuse of the Veterans Memorial Building? Good evening. If you could please state your name for the record.
Eric Nelson. Can I have an extra 20 seconds to explain the address?
Sure.
The 17-acre parcel where the El Dorado Government Center is located has 5 addresses. It's 100, 104, 108, 130, and I think 220 Armory. All the mail that goes to the Veterans Center goes to 130, and which is actually then brought down. But the actual physical address for the parcel is 100. I don't know if you mailed the letter to 100 if it would get there, but that is the actual address, and that's straight from the surveyor's office. In the 1970s, an effort was made to take the Veterans Memorial Building in Los Angeles away, and the veterans were able to successfully save their building. Currently, veterans in Sonoma County are involved in litigation related to their building. I don't have the details. But the one I wanted to talk about is what happened in 1988 just down the road in Sonora, Tuolumne County. The Veterans Building there, the county began a slow takeover. The first thing they did was put a weights and measures office in. Then later, they put in an assembly member's office. Then later, they put in a library. And then they put in storage. And finally, they moved the veterans entirely out of the first floor in order to put in a courthouse, so the disabled American veterans couldn't even use their own building anymore. Finally, the veterans had been pushed to one room upstairs. And at that point, 8 Vietnam veterans filed a lawsuit. And even then, the county wouldn't give the building back. It took 2.5 years. They did win. They were awarded fees. And on top of that, the county of Tuolumne was ordered to do substantial repairs to the building to make it accessible to disabled veterans. I want to contrast that with the rapid response of our mayor, who very shortly after finding out about this issue supported the resolution and brought it forward tonight. And I think the contrast is substantial, and for that I thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Is there another member of the public wishing to address the council on item 12.7?
My dad served in World War II in the Navy. So there's a soft spot in my heart for veterans. And I noticed that the City Council regularly amends the general plan when the need arises, and it's often on the whims of the California State Legislature. I'm glad to see the city amend the general plan to show appropriate support for our veterans. Our veterans bled and died for us, and they deserve respect for their service. So amending the general plan, I think, shows that respect and support. So thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Is there another member of the public that would like to address the council on 12.7? Seeing, yes, sir. Come on up. We would be glad to hear from you. Good evening. If you could state your name for the record.
My name is Richard Aiken. I've been living in the county for about 18 years now. And I'm proud to say that I really appreciate the work that you, Mr. Mayor, has put into this. A lot of people have had wrong impressions of what the veterans' wishes were on this. And our wishes were to let us be the veterans, work with you folks, work with the county, and assist the veterans in their need. Statistically, there's a question whether it's 14,000 or 17,000 veterans living in El Dorado County. That's a substantial amount of people who have voting powers. And I think you're doing the right thing to show the support for the veterans. I appreciate it, the effort you put in, and I speak for the Marine Corps League Detachment 697. and we really appreciate having the building back. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your service. Is there another member of the public that wishes to address the council on item 12.7? Seeing no one else approaching the podium, I'll go ahead and close public comment on this item and bring it back to the council for action. Just to clarify, I was contacted early Wednesday afternoon on this matter and recognized that there was a grave concern over an older document that while it may not have carried any significance from a legal planning, city zoning realm, it did cast a significant shadow on where the city stood on the current status of the Veterans Memorial Building. Went back and quickly reviewed, thanks to Mr. Rivas's quick work, I believe it's about 142-page document, the Placerville Drive Vision Plan. And there's some really pretty streetscape pictures in there, and there's a huge wish list of things that we had a lot of community support from. I was a part of that. There were a number of hearings that took place. Property owners, citizens, business owners. Everybody wanted a Trader Joe's and a Costco. Well, we got Home Depot, but so what happened, unfortunately, is when that project, we had received a planning grant to perform that work. And at that time, it was common knowledge, casual, maybe nothing official, but there was some movement going on that eventually resulted in the VFW building a new hall out on Green Valley Road. Well, unfortunately, there were some assumptions that were made that at some point that site, the Veterans Memorial Building, might become available. Well, the report does not read that way. It says that the veteran site should be considered as a multimodal facility. A very simple clarifying statement back in 2008 or 2009 when it was adopted that simply stated that only upon the abandonment by the veterans organizations, or this report takes into consideration activity that's taking place in the community. I mean, it would have been simple to put about 6 or 8 words in there and have clarified that this document had no more reach to taking that building. So it seemed to me that based on the concern that was being generated in the community, that the best thing to do, and I want to thank Mr. Warren as acting city manager here in some stripes. In your absence, Cleve, you're going to have to consider giving him a raise. I thought that I appreciate Dave's willingness to work hard on this, and we gathered up the information. Mr. Rivas was able to go off and enjoy a long weekend, and that was good. I think he and I carried the burden of it along with some assistance from Mr. Driscoll and Mr. Nelson, and got this thing addressed to that we would just come to a resolution, to just as the resolution proposes, to clearly identify that it has never been and will never be the intent of the city to reuse that building or that site period, as long as it, and to continue to support its use as a veterans facility in perpetuity. So with that, I would welcome a motion or other comments from council members on this item.
I will reluctantly move this resolution forward. It's not necessary. And unfortunately, it made its way through social media, other places. There was never any intention to do this. I know we made specific comments at other council meetings stating that we would have sent a letter that was ratified by this board to do that. And unfortunately, like many things in the social media sphere, it creates stories that start here and end over here that have no relevance to the actual truth. And so I hope this is a one-time deal for us. My dad fought in Vietnam. My grandpa fought in World War I. All my uncles fought in Korea. I love veterans. I think it's a damn shame when we have one veteran that's on the street that's homeless. We should be doing everything we can to help them. This has nothing to do with how I feel about veterans, but don't like the way this ultimately came about, or the SAC-B article that came out stating that we were going to imminently move Veterans Hall, which we don't even own to begin with. And so that's just my comments. Like I said, I will move this resolution, but I wanted to make that statement as well.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Kara, further discussion, comments?
First, let me state that I have two brothers that are retired Army and Navy. My grandfather died in training camp for World War II, 2 weeks before World War II ended on July 5th. Not 2 weeks, but a few weeks before World War II ended, July 5th, 1945. My family has seen and suffered a lot of the challenges. My brother is locally a veteran and has a lot of challenges that you see some veterans having. I have a huge soft spot for veterans. I respect them, and I appreciate the contributions that my family has made and that all veterans have made, past and present. There appears to be a false narrative out there that we wanted to move this building, and I'm not sure where it came from. And it caused it. When I heard about it, I know that this body and this city would have no intent and intention to do that. And I believe it was a little strong-handed way to move the city forward. And I really don't appreciate that. I don't appreciate the way that came down. And I support this as an idea. I don't support how it was brought to the city and the expectations of the city, because it's simply a visioning document, and it was clear that we did not need to jump through a bunch of hoops. However, I felt that the city was held hostage by the potential of more media disparaging remarks and bringing shadows over this city that were unwarranted and completely unwarranted. And it painted the city as unpatriotic and not caring for our veterans, and that is far from the truth. I care about, when I was elected, I was elected to the city to preserve its resources and to use them wisely. I don't think that our resources were used wisely in this. I think it cost the city time and money and energy that was not necessary. We could have handled this much differently. And it's unfortunate that we did it this way. It didn't need to happen. I have immense appreciation for the veterans of this community. It did bring about a very entertaining article in the newspaper, which was unfortunate that it had to go to that length. So I wanted to leave it at that. I support the veterans. I support the idea. I don't support how long and how difficult it was to get to this point. It could have been done much simpler quite a while ago. So thank you.
Kara, thank you, Dennis. Kara, did you have any comments you want to add?
No, I don't.
Oh, come on.
I will say that it was clear that this resolution meant a lot to the veterans. I'm glad that we found a resolution. I agree that there were other ways to go about it that would have been more beneficial to the city. But I am happy to, it's clear that this is really meaningful to the veterans organizations, and I'm happy to support it.
Thank you. One of the beauties of this country is that all four of us council members, thanks to the hundreds of years of defending our freedoms, we're allowed to sit up here and espouse our thoughts and supports and represent the community as we see best fit. And yes, I was very much blindsided by what was going on, and I very much could understand from the city staff perspective that they could see, because that's their profession, that there were dozens of reasons why the city can, and this is very true, can never touch the Veterans Memorial Building unless the veterans have well and long abandoned it. and then only after we could purchase it from the county. So there are immense numbers of things that are protecting you in that building. But that's a planner's perspective. That's a city manager's perspective. That's even a city council member's perspective. And that's not a veteran's perspective. And it was clear to me that I needed to engage with the concerned parties on both sides of this issue, that there was real damage being done to the community's reputation. And we do have a wonderful community here. And I'm going to share in a minute a little bit of what I learned as a part of my time on Wednesday and Thursday and Friday working on this issue. And I'm glad that I had this opportunity to stop and step back and think about what was going on in 2008 and kind of do some fact checking there, and then stop and listen to the concerns in the veterans community. Had the opportunity to remove my ego from the issues, and also was able to remember all of the Vietnam veterans that I worked with at PG&E in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. Sadly, now I understand why some of them are no longer with us, why some of them behaved the way they did, why some of them had substance abuse and violence, domestic violence issues, because they all came home and there wasn't any treatment for them. I worked beside these men day and night, and admired them for their ability to carry on and do the best they could. So I felt that the best thing to do was to try and cut to the chase. The process would be to take the matter back, have a public hearing at the Planning Commission, have staff prepare, after being directed by the council to do so, to go back and spend planning staff and planning commission time to make a recommendation, to come back, to remove the words, that it would then be agendized with another staff report and more time to bring it forward for vote. Or we could simply go to a resolution to remove the wording and also include some wording that showed our continued support for that site. And that's what this resolution does this evening. So with that, I would like to thank David Zielinski and Eric Nielsen for their time on this. I found out from David that we can be damn proud of the services that he and his fellow veterans provide. They have probably the first or second best in the entire state of California for veterans stand down, and the efforts that go into that, to helping every veteran, and no matter what the crisis may be in his or her life. So with that, I felt like Dave and I did the best we could with the resources that we had available, and I was glad that I could meet with these gentlemen and understand the concerns and the real threats. It's disgusting to hear some of the stories that were shared that other counties have actually tried to go in and take their veterans' buildings away. So I think it seemed like this was a simple action that we could take to thank them for the service that they have provided this country. So with that, I will go ahead and ask the clerk to please call a roll.
Mayor Acuna?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Zaragoza?
Aye.
Councilmember Taylor?
Aye.
Councilmember Thomas?
Aye.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your time this evening. We're going to go back now to our normal order in the agenda, item 12.1, which is to review the city's existing fire stuff. Fire ordinance and provide input to staff regarding possible amendments. Cleve, you have that report?
Yeah, I'll do that with the assistance of the city attorney, because he wrote this for me, I'll have to admit, with me being out of town. Previously, the council requested that staff look at an ordinance to prohibit open fires in the city during the summer months, so basically from May to December. We went back and started working on that and discovered that we already have an ordinance that partially addresses that, that we reviewed, and you have a copy of that in with the staff report in your agenda. One of the things that was concerning is there is a provision that says it allows for fires between the hours of 6 p.m. and 12 p.m. In the current one, but that is only with a written permit from the fire chief. So that does prevent that also, any fires in the city, unless you have a permit for that from the fire chief. It allows for fires for grilling and fire pits, et cetera, that are approved grills and pits for that. But there are some recommendations that we came up with, and those are also in your report, that we could go back and amend this. The question has come up whether or not this could be an urgency ordinance, and that's a question that for our city attorney that I've talked to him about, and I believe it's his opinion that based on that we already have an ordinance that it would not constitute an urgency to come back and reflect this. Again, these provisions are already in place of the current ordinance, and we will make sure that we can distribute those to both police and fire, that they can enforce those currently. And the dates are approximately the same. This is not May 1st. I'm not sure why it was May 2nd, but runs from May 2nd to the end of the fire season. So with that, John, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to that.
No, I just, when we first looked at this, and before we realized that we had one on the books, I thought, well, we can do an urgency ordinance because we don't have anything in place. We do have something in place, and while it's not perfect, it's good enough to cover the subject, frankly, and I think eliminate the need for the legal and justifiable need for an urgency ordinance. There's some things in it that I would like to see changed. I think the reference to the fires between 6 p.m. and midnight, I think that can be eliminated and should be eliminated. Right now we have controls because it can only be done if you have a permit from the fire chief, and I doubt very seriously the fire chief's going to issue any permits, especially this time of year. I think it was pointed out that's also not a very good time to burn. It's maybe better to burn between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. in the morning if you're going to do that. But I personally think it would be much cleaner if you eliminate all of that. The suggested ordinance is simply that. It's a suggestion and food for thought. It doesn't mean that it has to be that way. But we were trying to put something quickly together which would give the council some, perhaps some thoughts and some fuel, or that's a bad pun. Some food for thought. At any rate, I think that's it. We just would like to get some direction from the council as what you would like to see in the ordinance.
Thank you, John. Questions for city staff?
How did you come up with?
Whoops.
How did you come up with December 1st?
Actually, that was what Cleve had suggested.
Cleve?
And the reason that I figured, usually by then, we're out of the fire season, the rains have occurred, or started to occur, hopefully. But it did cross my mind when I used that date that we have had some winters that are dry in December, too.
Sure.
So the fire, the CAL FIRE, has their standard burn and no burn days that they promote and they approve, and County Fire follows those. And so what is the purpose of having another layer of burn days on top of this? Let's say CAL FIRE extends it because we have a very wet spring, or they bring it forward because we have a very wet fall. Why do we need to put something that CAL FIRE, who is eminently, in my opinion, qualified to make those dates, why do we need to make those dates too?
That's up to you. You don't have to. We've had, this year, for example, burn days after May 1st.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, so you don't have to. But you are, and this isn't legal, it's just my opinion, you are deferring then to somebody else's judgment. Maybe they're the people who have the expertise to make it, but are they making it on a local basis that's unique to Placerville versus more of a county-wide or area-wide, region-wide decision? I don't know. That's the only thing I can think.
We're clearly open either
Yeah.
way to that. We can
That's
make
good.
it.
I think that's a very valid point.
do that language that way.
Kara, did you have comments and questions for Cleve?
Well,
Or John?
I've got a question for just kind of in general to the council, I guess. Do we want to allow burning in city limits, period?
Oh, you mean as far as debris burning in the?
Yeah, I mean,
winter?
my family lives in Camino. I used to live on Carson Road on 100 acres, and we debris burned all the time, but it was outside of the city limits.
Right.
Or do we want to have like a parcel? You know, I mean, on small parcels, why does anyone need to debris burn?
That's true.
We have waste facilities and yard waste, and I mean, aside from the fire hazard, it's a small town that's kind of, you know, surrounded by hills, so everything settles and it just seems like it's bad for air quality.
I think that if you were to completely outlaw it, I think we would get a lot of concern raised in the community. Maybe based on the size of the parcel, you could consider that, but
That's been
I
suggested.
know there's a lot of people
Like
that.
for parcels
that-
over an acre or something?
I have a neighbor that every year in the spring, he burns debris on his property. He's about an acre.
That possibility was brought up, that prohibition was brought up as a possibility, gosh, 10 years ago or more. I think when I was city manager, and it was not well received.
No.
I can tell you that.
No.
Do you think general attitudes about it has changed recently? I mean, I can see if you have over an acre, burning debris is the most effective way to get it done. But for a lot of the town parcels that are, you know, a quarter of an acre or a tenth of an acre, it seems unnecessary.
Yeah. You're cutting into my oak tree burning season.
It
I want to focus back on what is, and that is a kind of a discussion for another time, and it's a valid point. There is growing concern about it, and there's a couple people I know out there right now that don't like it. I want to find out if the Vice Mayor has any questions for staff right now on the proposed ordinance.
No, I do not.
Okay. Then I'm going to go ahead and open public comment on this, item 12.1, a proposed burning ordinance to prohibit out campfires. Any member of the public wishing to address us? We have 4 members of the public.
Sue Rodman, Placerville. I'm one of those people with a 1 acre parcel, and when I have my guys come to trim the trees and take out dead wood and stuff, it's too much for my little green waste bin. It won't handle it. And the most effective way to do it is to burn those tree trimmings and branches and pieces. We took out a couple of hazard trees this year, and the most effective way to deal with the smaller stuff is to burn it. And if you burn well, so that you keep your fire under what CAL FIRE's permits allow you to do, and keep it hot and burning, and don't let it smoke and smolder, it's not terribly awful to be around. Our open burning ordinance, the way it sits right now, I think it does need some extensive remodeling. It has some major flaws, especially that specification to burn at night from 6 p.m. to midnight. It wouldn't be the very worst, but it's also not the best time to burn, since a fire could escape during darkness and you wouldn't know. It would escape without being noticed. Also, it doesn't allow for a humidity recovery that happens at night. So the best time frame when limiting burning is to burn in the early morning, between 6 and 10 p.m. And when we've done my property, we burn in the morning. We are always done by noon. And then it's just a matter of making sure that it stays out. The current ordinance also doesn't differentiate between burning garbage, etc., and burning to control and dispose of hazardous vegetation. We need a prohibition on open burning of garbage, rubbish, construction debris, cardboard, and plywood at any time, because those are things that put in some toxic chemicals into the air that you don't want to do. And that proposed ordinance is so basic that it really doesn't cover the subject with sufficient detail. So I've submitted a proposal that I use as parts of the existing and the proposed burning ordinances to updates and recognize the role of the Air Quality Control Board and CAL FIRE permit requirements that would work with the hazardous vegetation ordinance and allow appropriate use of burning to dispose of hazardous vegetation during the season allowed by CAL FIRE. So with that, I'll give both of these to the city clerk, and I think you may already have a copy of my proposed suggestion revision. I sent it into Cleve, and I think it covers the subject better than either of the proposals that were in the in the staff reports on this item.
Thank you, Sue. Is there another member of the public wishing to address the council on 12.1?
Good evening again, Mayor and members of the council. Kathy Lishman. It's always nice to hang out with nice people. Well, I know, too, if you have someone come to your property to do work, a lot of times they have a chipper, and they will either leave it or take it away. It doesn't have to be burned. I have 9/10 of an acre, and I don't burn. My neighbor across the street, who used to work for the Forest Service, he's retired, he used to burn until he found out it bothered the neighbors, and now he doesn't burn anymore. And I think you can have up to 3 yard waste containers. That wouldn't satisfy Sue's situation, but a chipper would, and the county Fire Safe Council has chippers that can come around too. In the wet season, it smokes. You know, after December 1st, the fires smoke. And I don't know how many people in the city actually burn or how many people would be opposed to it. And I know I mentioned before that we have a senior citizen home down the street from us. And I just think that burning is not healthy and it's not good for the air. And sometimes in the winter, when you're on Highway 50 and you look over to the south side of town, you can just see smoke hanging in the air there. Anyway, I'd rather see no burning. Sorry, Mark.
I'll move. I may have to cut all the trees down. Who knows? Is there any other member of the public wishing to address the council on this item? I was going to steal your line, so you might as well come up. What are we? Since you're here.
Okay. Hi, it's me again, John.
Thank you, Mr. Clarici.
A couple things, and I sent a text to my council member because I have his phone number. The one thing I saw, and I thought I saw it in the staff report, and this is very specific. I assume that the homeless cannot start a fire in town at any time of the day or night or year ever, because they'd basically be starting a fire almost certainly on somebody else's property, because of course they're homeless and they don't have their own. So is that part of our ordinance? Because if it ain't, it should be. I'm just asking. And I don't even know. I should have done some research. I'm the person I used to not like very much. But if it ain't in there, then it should be. If you don't own the property and you're starting a fire, I don't care if it's raining in the middle of January, you should not be allowed to do that. Okay. I have no feelings about whether people should burn their things. Ever since I got a green, I don't have that much land. I like the green yard waste thing. I like to put things in there. So I haven't burnt anything probably in Placerville probably in 15 years. But if you're doing it, I love tending fires.
Come on down.
Yeah, it's fun. Anyway, that's it. No homeless fires ever. That should be part of it.
Get your whites out. Oil them up.
Oh, yeah. You get a towel and some diesel fuel. That'll burn forever. Anyway,
Torch.
thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Clarici. And I'm going to steal your line. Is there any other member of the public? Well, that's the public. Mrs. Zito? No, okay. I close public comment on this, bring it back to the council, and it is, as Mr. Clarici had said earlier, what are we trying to accomplish? My goal in this, and it was kind of short-circuited, was to address exactly what he brought up, is the homeless fires and the campfires. And for this season only, specifically because of the high fire risks and our ordinance isn't in place yet. And believe it or not, there is still confusion when those campfires get called in. Our police department knows exactly what's supposed to happen, but depending on who's working county fire, it may or may not work. And the goal with this evening was a one-time emergency ordinance to address no outdoor fires on public or private property, with the correct wording, to allow the police and the fire department to have very clear enforceable tools this fire season. And I guess because we have an existing ordinance that threw out the ability to do an urgency ordinance, so if we even make adoptions, which I'm still okay with, the soonest it could go into effect would be September. July, middle of September? Yeah. Well, that's an awful lot of campfires out there, and so I don't know that this doesn't do what I intended. Kara?
But in the meantime, there is in the existing ordinance, it does limit fires now for this time of year, right? Is that how I read it?
Is it?
Okay. Well, start with the premise that from May 2nd, based on our existing ordinance, you can't have an open fire unless you get a permit from the fire chief and you're doing it from 6 to midnight. There is a section that talks about no permit being required when a pit or grill is used for cooking or food preparation. Now, and under continuous supervision, but I think the thing that I would consider as enforceable there, and all flammable combustible material is removed a sufficient distance therefrom so as not to constitute a fire hazard. That gives us some ability to enforce fire, let's say, that a person has on either public property or property that's not theirs, where there is a fire hazard as a result of the combustible material that's around where they're burning or grilling or whatever they're doing. So it's there. It's a little more difficult, but it is there, and it makes it, it just makes it more difficult to introduce this as an urgency ordinance. I mean, I can try and prepare some findings that would allow us to introduce it. We could do a backup regular ordinance, as we've done sometimes when we've done urgencies. And if it doesn't get challenged, if it gets challenged, we'll defend it. But if we lose, we still have a backup. And I just can't guarantee you that we're not going to lose if we get challenged, that's all.
Well, I know in my discussions with various command staff at the police department that they really felt that this was something that they needed to get through another summer with the number of campfires that go on. And the problem is some of the fire personnel do respond, and the people will claim they're homeless folks on whoever's property, and they'll say, well, that's a cooking fire. So then they'll allow them to continue. And I don't know how any fire guy can see that connection, but they do, unfortunately. And these campfires aren't extinguished until our police department goes out and extinguishes them. This has happened just in the last 2 summers that I'm aware of. And I wanted to try and prevent that from happening again this summer.
We can try it.
But we don't have it before us this evening.
I would move that we go with this current one, and at the next council meeting prepare an emergency. But by the time, if that's an emergency, how quickly does it become enforceable?
Immediately.
Okay.
So it would be the 13th.
So I would move that we adopt this current one as a backup, and then at the next council meeting.
We would introduce 2 ordinances, an urgency ordinance and then just the regular one that would go through the regular process at the August 13th meeting.
Can we do this one now? Because
No, it's not on, it hasn't been agendized as a,
First reading.
yeah.
Oh, gotcha, okay.
The one that's here, the current ordinance, is in effect now, and it does give us some enforcement that we can do, not where we want it to be exactly, but this will enable us to do some enforcement. So
I would, well, Commander Wren's here, and I would tell them that if they go out and they find a fire, a homeless person on property obviously that they don't own, that they have the authority under this ordinance to cite them. Now, the other thing that we want to do is make it a misdemeanor rather than an infraction, because this is an infraction. And we want it, that, again, that wouldn't be the basis for urgency, but it's something we want to, the change we want to make is make it a misdemeanor. But I would tell Commander Wren, if you guys go out there and they see a fire, enforce this ordinance, and if they have a barbecue and they're using some sort of a grill, well, I would be surprised in the first place, but it's possible. It's probably going to be an area where it's near combustible material, so they still can enforce it.
I like your suggestion, Dennis. Was that a motion?
No, because we can't do this one right now.
Oh, okay.
But
Well, yeah, no,
you
kind
can
of
make a
sort of was.
motion, though, to bring back an urgency ordinance and a normal ordinance
And
at the next meeting.
Prepare this for first reading.
Yeah.
I'll go with that motion, and I'd like to amend my motion, if you don't mind, to remove and allow CAL FIRE to set the dates beginning and ending of the fire season.
Got it.
I don't think they'll let us down, so.
Yes.
All right, so with that amendment, the motion still stands. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We're getting there. Commander Wren,
Quick now.
tell the sergeants we're working on it. This is a very serious issue. One of these days, we're going to be unlucky. And so far, we've had the right people in the right places, and the conditions haven't been windy, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you for the council's continued support on this. We do need to do everything we can to engage this issue this rest of this fire season. All right, moving on to 12.2, adopt a resolution retroactively amending the salary and benefit provisions for all non-sworn employees in the executive management branch. Cleve?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This item happens every year. For our executive and executive management unit of employees, they're not formally organized unit, so we sit down with them and just discuss what we would like to see. Normally, we follow very closely to what the same agreement is with our Local 39, our other employees. And that's what we are recommending this year. One change, addition to this, is that we add the annual boot allowance for the Director of Public Works. Because of his working out in the field, we felt that was appropriate, and that's similar to what is allowed for other Public Works or Parks employees. So with this adoption, it will adopt the salary table and the resolution and put it in place for the executive management unit. You can see the total cost of this is $26,000 that was included in your budget. And with that, we'll answer any questions you may have on that.
Thank you, Cleve. Any questions for Cleve? All right, thank you. I'll open public comment on item 12.2. Member of the public wishing to address, seeing no one, I'll close public comment and bring it back to the council for action. Is there a motion?
I'd move 12.2.
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Mayor Acuna?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Zaragoza?
Aye.
Councilmember Taylor?
Aye.
Councilmember Thomas?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you very much. Point of order, Mr. Driscoll. Yes, sir. I noticed one member of the audience is here this evening for specific item 12.5. Would it be appropriate to move that Goldbug Park item up so that she doesn't have to sit through a couple of construction change orders? All right, then if the council is in concurrence with that, I'll go ahead and I will hear the next item, which will be 12.5. Adopt a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute an amendment between the city and Hangtown's Goldbug Park Development Committee. Mr. Zeller, I think you're still down over there next to Nick. Been a long evening. I understand you have the staff report.
Yes, I do.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Council and Mayor and Mr. City Manager. The staff report before you today is to adopt a resolution, which is on the following page, that's in essence executing an addendum to the February 2015 agreement between the City of Placerville and Hangtown Goldbug Park Development Committee. It's in essence language that allows the agreement to trigger the committee's insurance be the primary insurance. In a nutshell, it was reviewed and suggested through Parsac, which is the city's insurance carrier, and I can answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Terry. Any questions for staff on item 12.5? Cleve?
Nothing further.
Okay, you had a look. All right, I'm going to open public comment on item 12.5 and ask any member of the public that would like to comment on this item. Let the record know that the sole representative of Goldbug Park approached.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Zeller, for getting this on the agenda. Just for clarification, this did come from Parsac, as Mr. Zeller said. The language that's being added to the agreement between Hangtown's Goldbug Park Development Committee, and the city, our liability policy already has this language in it. Our endorsement exists that the city, we are primary and non-contributory endorsement for public entities. Parsec suggested that it would be wise to duplicate that same language in our agreement. So it's nothing really new, it's just we're tying up some loose ends. So we are headed to our biggest fundraiser of the year on August 24th, which is the murder mystery. And we wanted to get this cleared up prior to that event. In speaking to Eric Young, Parsec's representative, when I sent him our liability policy, our liability renews each May 20th, and our first fundraiser of the year is Memorial Day weekend every year, so it's always really tight. He read the entire 127 pages of our liability policy and suggested this language, and if I had any questions, to give him a call. So I did, and said, are you saying this has to be accomplished in a week because the council isn't even meeting and this would probably have to go? He says, no. It's something that I'm suggesting. So we now have a bit of a time to be able to get it done before August 24th. And we would like to invite you all to the Murder Mystery Dinner. Tickets, I believe, at both the Chamber and Mary's Placerville News. They sold out over the weekend at Placerville News, and Charlie had to transfer some tickets from the Chamber over to them. So tickets are going fast. Wow. It is only 60 folks that are able to be seated for the murder mystery. That's the limit to the tickets we can sell. This is the first year we're doing it in August rather than in July. I don't know that the weather will be any cooler. We've hit, in the past 2 years, the hottest weekends of the year out there. But as you know, Goldbug is pretty darn cool, and the mine is about a constant 56. So folks have hung out in the mine during the event. So we would like to invite those of you that would think about coming out. It's a really fun evening, and it's our major fundraiser. And as you know, all the money that we raise goes back to the park. So thank you very much for getting this on tonight's agenda.
You're very welcome. Thank you for your work at the park. Any other member of the public wishing to address the council on this item? Seeing no one, I'll go ahead and close public comment and bring it back to the council for action. Would somebody like to make a motion on 12.5?
I'll move.
Second.
Is anybody involved? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Susan, we look forward to Murder in the Mine. Say hello to Rich. Back to our normally scheduled programming, to item 12.3. This is a construction change orders with Veerkamp Engineering. I believe our city engineer, Rebecca Neves, has this report for us this evening.
Good evening, Mayor and Vice Mayor and Council. As you know, the Western Placerville Interchange Phase 2 project is currently under construction and work is ongoing with expected completion late this fall. The item before you this evening is for the ratification of several change orders that allow for the project to be built more efficiently and with a reduction in public inconvenience through allowing the intersection of Forney Road and Ray Lawyer Drive to have remained open through the winter up to April 29th of this year. The funding for the project is provided by a variety of state and federal grants that can only be used specifically on this project. One such grant that the city staff was able to capture is the FHWA California Earmark Repurposing Revenue in the amount of $287,968, which is before you this evening for appropriation specifically for use on the Western Placerville Interchange Phase 2 project. The two change orders before you for approval are CCOs 36 and 37. Contract change order 36 is a change order that funded a project is funded through the project agreement that we have with EID as necessary work to maintain service to the county jail. Contract change order 37 is for additional roadway overlay to address the detour impacts on Ray Lawyer Drive and Fair Lane caused by stage construction through construction of the project. The extent of work is shown on the exhibit attached to staff's report. Paving of the areas shown is expected to occur in early August. With the project 2/3 complete, project encumbrances is well within the budget with $725,229 remaining, or 8% of the total 10% original contingency. Staff's recommendations are in the report provided this evening, and this concludes my verbal report. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Any questions for staff on the item? I'll go ahead and open it to public comment. Any member of the public wishing to address item 12.3? Seeing no one approaching the podium, I'll close public comment, bring it back to the council for action or other questions. Would someone like to make a motion? Project's moving along very nicely.
I'll move that we adopt item 12.3 as presented.
Is there a second?
A second.
Seconded by Councilmember Taylor. Roll call vote, please.
Mayor Acuna?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Zaragoza?
Aye.
Councilmember Taylor?
Aye.
Councilmember Thomas?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Motion carries. Moving on to 12.4, approving a consulting agreement with Drake Hagel and Associates for design services for sewer line relocation, Clay Street to Locust, and to approve a $500,000 budget appropriation from the Measure L fund. Again, our city engineer.
Good evening again. The Hangtown Creek Sewer Line Relocation Project was first adopted in the 2011-2012 Capital Improvement Program budget, originally funded with a combination of sewer enterprise funds and a grant from the El Dorado County Water Agency, which partially funded design. No construction funds have yet been identified or secured for the project at this time. The item before you this evening is for council's consideration and approval of a consultant contract that will allow design to be completed. Having a complete design for a project such as this puts the city in a better position when applying for construction grant funding. As part of council's consideration for this item is to proceed with phase 1 that would evaluate the feasibility of shifting the sewer alignment away from Hangtown Creek for obvious water quality and constructability reasons that accompany with installing a large sewer main within a creek corridor. Staff is seeking approval and council's direction of this sewer infrastructure project. Staff's recommendations are summarized in the report, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Are there any questions for Rebecca on item 12.4?
I had a question.
Speaking to them. Thank you.
So with the spreadsheet on the second page, where it itemizes the different line items, construction isn't in there. Is this only for design and not including the construction?
Correct.
Okay. Darn it.
Yeah.
Yes.
The $500,000 would partially fund some of the construction.
Okay.
Yeah.
But probably a very, very small part of it. This will be a big project.
Yes.
This is a big
But by designing this, we do then have the information necessary to go after grants and other things that we could use to help fund it. So.
Okay.
Are there grants out there to help with this type of project?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, one particular grant that we've been pretty successful in working with, we work with, our CABI group that helped us secure funding for the Pardee Waterline project. Water quality is a pretty hot ticket item for possible grants, and we see information coming out all the time about these kinds of projects. Not to say that there aren't other worthy projects within the city for those grants, but it also depends on how fast you can get ready and in a good position. Having a project that's ready to go to construction definitely helps an application.
Yeah. I just don't, I did not realize how expensive these projects are until I started dealing with it from the council perspective, and it is, I just don't know, without the funding that we have acquired through Measure H&L, yeah, it's just it blows me away. So, yeah.
Oh yeah.
And thank you for all your hard work on this too.
My pleasure.
Michael, questions for staff at this point?
No.
Okay. Go ahead and open public comment and invite Sue Rodman to come forward and speak to the item because she is faithfully following the meeting.
And
Good evening,
faithfully
again.
following Measure H&L. I am really happy to see this. Getting the sewer out of Hangtown Creek has been one of my personal goals for years now, ever since we put together Measure H to start with. What was one of the things that has been on the oh, please, can we just get that sewer line out of the creek? And every time you walk along that trail and you look at that sewer line and some of the patches in it, you say, oh, I hope they hold until we can get this out of the creek. So I am really happy to see this go forward.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and close public comment on the item, bring it back to the council for comments and discussion. I had a question for either Cleve or Rebecca. Is there an existing CIP for the Cedar Ravine Creek sewer relocation?
Yes, there is. It's actually going to be on your August 13th agenda for design on that contract. And the only reason why this item came before that item is because we received this proposal in time to bring it on this agenda, and we did not receive the other proposal in time to bring it onto the next agenda. But that one is on the August 13th agenda as well.
Okay. And do you happen to know approximately what the design or the funding requests are going to be on that?
Ballpark the same amount for the
About
design
the same
contract.
amounts. Okay. Thank you. I had a question for Nick then. I've watched that pipe get battered this last 2 or 3 winters. It's been kind of a sport to see if the poor thing would survive or if it would take out a building. First, we've had flooding at the tire shop. We've also had tremendous I&I and leaks on the Cedar, what I call the Cedar Ravine Creek system, which is also a really visually bad looking sewer line. Which one of those two systems causes us to say in the last 2 years, which one of those two has caused us the most problems?
I would say that they're fairly equal, Mayor.
They're what, sir?
I would say that they're fairly equal. I don't think that one of them was worse than the other one.
Oh,
We've
goodness.
had multiple issues out on Cedar Ravine right there by Marshall Way, where we've had to go out there and respond. And then also the tire shop, and then there have been a few other issues that we've had to correct when the water was low enough on the just downstream from the tire shop, kind of around Independence.
Independence,
Yes,
yeah.
Yes, sir.
How much freeboard was there before it went into Independence? That was the measuring gauge. A couple of nights there wasn't any.
Nothing went into the Independent, to my knowledge.
No. All right. All right. Well, thank you for that, Nick. That's helpful for me to know that they are equally bad actors. Pardon me for hogging staff.
Oh.
Mr. Saragossa?
I'm good.
I guess my concern is 500,000 is a lot. It's what 25% of our 2 million that we roughly get in revenue for a project that doesn't have identified funding source going forward. Ideally, I'd love to be able to see 500,000 go into something that's more shovel ready, that we could show to the residents that we're actually using the Measure L and H funds in the most thoughtful way, where we can get things done today versus tomorrow. And I understand that we can't go, it will be very difficult to go forward with this without having the plans done. And so there is a conundrum there, because you got to have that in order to go forward to get more money. But because we do have limited funds and we have so many needs in the city, I'd much rather see this money repurposed in a way that goes into something that will be able to be seen, whether it's later this year or earlier next year, versus an unknown date. Because it is a big expenditure that we're undertaking for something that we don't have an identified funding source going forward.
Vice Mayor Saragosa, if I may, just for some background information, just for in the consideration of the process, we always like to balance our choices. I do want to remind council that back in 2017 that the council adopted a resolution supporting a work plan to the Regional Water Quality Control Board. This project, along with Cedar Ravine, were also both identified as commitments to the state to address that. Just as a consideration, not that we're not moving on this project, it just kind of depends on the amount of aggressive effort. That's all.
Understood.
That's an interesting footnote. And I do recall that. I know they do watch. Okay. Karen, did you have any further thoughts, comments?
Yeah, I do agree with Michael Saragosa that I think just for the sustainability of Measure H&L and the community support, it would be great to see projects that were, ready to accomplish and that were highly visible and, got done in a time frame that the residents, I think, would see and appreciate. But my understanding with this is that these projects were in the CIP plan in the budget that we've already put a lot of consideration into. And I think getting the sewer system out of the creek is a really important thing to do. And I would imagine that there is an abundance of grant money to do this type of project. So I have faith that this will be a good investment going forward. And with that, I would move to adopt the resolution.
All right, it's been moved. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded. I'd like to ask for a little further discussion. I have some of the similar concerns. We really need to kind of make sure that we're connecting the dots with some of these projects that we've gotten started. We're going to start another school year here real quick, and we won't have finished Canal Street. And the section of Canal Street that we had to leave is horrible, and it does connect a tremendous amount of traffic between the two big schools on that part of town. And the community is wondering, well, when the heck are they coming back to fix this? Well, we're not. We are getting increasing pressure to start addressing streets like Clark and Bedford and some of the secondary streets that may not be perfect candidates, but are highly visible and are highly worn out. Perhaps in some instances even worse than Spring Street is. Another thought I had on this one was, this doesn't take into consideration the Clay Street project. This proposed design, and maybe it's a good thing because it's taking the hardest route. If I was a design engineer, I'd go, man, I'm going straight across that city parking lot. To heck with this trenching out here on Main Street. I think the thing the council needs to be aware of is when we did the pavement overlay on Main Street, that is a difficult piece of Main Street. That block between Cedar Ravine and Locust, the old Highway 50 concrete roadbed is in there. That is going to be a high dollar. You got all the way underground, well, let's see, overhead, underground. You've got some underground utilities in there, but that is going to be a trenching contractor's dream. Night work, noise issues, big city impact. So this is going to be a big project from the construction standpoint. Design's actually the easy part, I think. Not that Cedar Ravine wouldn't be just as challenging, but this is getting tough too. So I wanted to ask Mr. Warren, as is proposed this evening, we're being asked to set aside $500,000 of Measure L dollars. Now, of course, those are sitting in an account. And how fluid are those dollars when we make that commitment to this project? To approve our budget appropriation for Measure L funds for this project of $500,000. Are those dollars locked?
Those dollars are in the bank. You've already collected those dollars. I can say that, Rebecca, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe project there was an appropriate or a recommendation to fund it, and we actually liquidated it, and it was deferred for a few years, and now it's coming back. So back in May 17th of 2018, the Measure HL committee recommended the $500,000 funding. So a little over a year ago. So and it's taken time to develop the cash, but if the council wanted to redirect those funds, I would suggest you bring it back to the Measure HL committee for consideration, and then bring it back to you as a recommendation. But I can tell you that this project is very important. It's been kicked down the road a number of times. Well, it's already been deferred quite a bit. And I know the Riverwatch claim, this is something that I think is very important in that, in regards to that. But
okay.
I don't know if John might want to chime in on that.
Are you guys familiar with the Riverwatch claim?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so everybody's familiar with it. We had entered into a settlement agreement where we committed to do certain improvements to our systems every year. I forget the exact amount, but 250,000, yeah,
significant.
So they periodically check to make sure we're doing what we said we were going to do. They're not real good about it, but they do it enough that we want to make sure we follow through. So this project would help us with respect to that.
If I may piggyback on something that Assistant City Manager Warren mentioned, we have been actively trying to deliver projects in a fluid manner. And what I mean by that is the statement of it's been deferred. We have gone back and we made recommendations on some CIPs. And then as we progressed and found the need was better used elsewhere, we have liquidated funds out of this project and a couple other projects to help deliver and advance deliver projects that maybe weren't as high on a ranked scale as they were more on a political will scale. And so, to kind of reiterate what Dave said, that, we have kicked the can down the road a little ways. I just putting that information out on the table.
All right. Well, I have a motion on the floor, and I appreciate your patience. Did you have
Well, I do think that sometimes we have to bite the bullet with the public and recognize that these are projects that while they're not very sexy and people aren't seeing it done in front of their road, it's a big part of why we have the Measure H and L funds is to help with this particular issue and actually the risk of future spillage. I don't know if there's a risk. I'm sure there is a risk. I just don't know how much it is, but I think it's important to at least consider the mitigation of that risk as well in making this decision.
All right. Good points. Appreciate the additional information. There's definitely risks there. And the fines for those, depending on the severity of the event, could be significant. Could easily wind up being the cost of the design. So that would be very foolish. All right. Well, there's been a motion made to approve the item. I'll ask the clerk to please call a roll.
Mayor Acuna?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Zaragoza?
No.
Councilmember Taylor?
Aye.
Councilmember Thomas?
Aye.
All right. Motion carries 3-1. Good discussion. Good reminders. We have to get up to speed on all of these different things, and I'm glad to hear that Cedar Ravine, nope, didn't mean to point. Cedar Ravine is coming back. It's one of my favorite sewer lines. Nick has color video of it. Moving on to, I believe, our last discussion action item, 12.6. Mr. Zeller, the annual adjustment of funds for our basketball program. Good night, Sue.
All right.
Okay, thank you, Mayor and Council. As a matter of practice, the Community Services Department strives to balance our costs and our fees, and that's what has brought this item of business up tonight. And as you're aware, there's an increase in minimum wage that's continuing to move forward in the state of California, and we will see another increase in January of 2020. And this, along with a consent agenda item that you passed earlier tonight, have caused our expenses to go up for our officials, and that does affect our programs. And so tonight, the piece of business is to look at requesting an increase for our youth basketball fees, and that's including the early bird and the general player fees. So each would go up $6, and that would be $113 and $123 as the new costs. And as I said, the goal is to keep the program self-supporting. So we've got some tables in the staff report that show the costs that we're incurring on page 2. So it's around a little over $4,000 in extra costs that we're looking at. And then the small table below shows our participation and our expected additional expenditures and revenues. And you can see that it pretty well balances out. And then on the last page, we've got another attachment that shows some comparisons of agency program fees to ours, and you can see that we're right in the ballpark, pardon the pun, of the other costs and fees. So this request is to ask for the approval of the resolution and the increase of the fees, and I can answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Terry, and appreciate you keeping these fees current so that we can be being cost effective with these various programs. Any questions from the council? I'll open the public comment on this item. Let the record note that there are no members of the public present at this time. I'll close public comment, bring it back to the council for action.
Do you know how much the increase was in 2018?
I do not know that.
Okay.
Increase in project total.
The minimum wage went up the same amount, right, Dave?
It
Or was it
was,
just 50 cents then? Trying to remember.
Yeah. I think it was about an 8% increase. Actually, almost a 9% increase.
In 18, Dave? All right. Mr. Warren knows all numbers. All right. Let's see. Would someone like to make a motion? The clerk is standing by.
I'll move 12.6.
I'll second.
And seconded by Councilmember Taylor. A roll call vote, please.
Mayor Acuna?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Zaragoza?
Aye.
Councilmember Taylor?
Aye.
Councilmember Thomas?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Motion carries. And thank you all for your hard work, staff, all our department heads for the various items that we worked through here this evening. Councilmember reports for other agencies. Anybody have anything brief that we absolutely need to know about this evening?
Just SACOG, we went up to the burn areas for the King's Fire. Oh, yeah. We had members of the governor's office, other staff. So I thought it was a really good first-hand look for them, I thought, to see that. And the person from the governor's office, she's in the Office of Planning and Research. She's actually the head of the Governor Newsom's wildfire mitigation team or whatever. So Brian and I actually got to spend some good time, Supervisor Veerkamp, some good time with her, talking about some of the uniqueness of our areas and things that we need to get done, whether that's biomass, different things that could happen. And so it was really good, and I think it was good for other local elected officials too. But I was really happy the governor's office was there.
Very good. It's always important to have the dollars in there. We'll move on. Kara? Nope, we're good. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Moving on to requests for future agenda items. Is there any requests for future agenda items? Don't think so. Moving on to city manager staff reports. Cleve, do you have anything additional that you'd like to share with us?
I know it's late, but just quickly, I want to mention, I believe it was our last meeting, I asked for some information from Nick regarding pothole repairs.
Pothole repairs,
That
yes.
was brought up. So I just want to give you a few statistics that Nick prepared for me, and we'll look at this a little further. But from January 1 through June 20th, 49 calls for service for potholes. And generally those are filled the day of. If there's an emergency or something else they're working on, maybe not the day of, it may take a little bit more time, but generally we respond day of to fill those potholes. In addition, crews carry bags of ready mix with them, and if they come upon potholes, they will fill on their own. So they're not all just calls for service. They don't. 500 bags of permapatch were purchased and used. Nick, is that correct, or just purchased during that time?
No, they were all used.
All used.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're on to new pallets for the new fiscal year now.
Okay, thank you. 500 bags of permapatch, 8.9 tons of cold patch that was used, 12.6 tons of 3/8-inch hot mix, and 10 tons of half-inch hot mix asphalt. So all of that was used for repair of potholes and bad roads in the first about 5.5 months of this year, calendar year. So just wanted to provide that information. We'll work on some other things to try and track that. And I just wanted to compliment Nick. Thank you for that. The guys are out there filling potholes. It's not like we're sitting on our hands and not doing that. So that is happening out there. So thank you.
Thank you, Clay. Anything?
I'd like to roll back just a minute and consider that we, an agenda item for our next meeting in August, to consider the supporting Measure B for the fire
yes,
district.
There'll still be time to do that. Is there consensus to the council to go ahead and ask staff to prepare, let's see, what would that be? A resolution?
Resolution.
Yeah, of support for Measure B.
Yep.
Yep.
Oh, there is. There's total concurrence on that item. Make it so.
Got it.
Thank you. Something else from Mr. Driscoll to, oh, wait, you're going to be missing. Second meeting, August?
Yes.
All right.
I'm going to be on vacation.
I'll go with you. All right. Thank you for that, Dennis. It's, I wish we could have gotten to that sooner. This is kind of a unique thing, but I think it still shows, it'll start showing up in the process that the fire district will see that it's our intent to support their efforts. And I think we verbalized that this evening with a fairly substantial audience. So thank you, Dennis, for reminding us of that. Was that it, Cleve?
That's all.
Did Nick send you some more stats?
That's all.
All right. Let's see. Our next council meeting on July 23rd has been canceled. There's a number of items that we'll be considering at our next meeting on August 13th. So with there being no other further business this evening, I'll go ahead and adjourn our meeting till August 13th, 5:30 closed session, 6 p.m. regular meeting. Thank you and good night.